20 seconds.
Fault lines.
Live from across the divided states of America, it is time now for another edition of the most disruptive show covering news and events across those divided states as well as across our divided globe. In the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, a burning ember in the darkness, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together we are Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. And let's get straight into it. I hope everybody had a good weekend. I know I had a good one. I'll be honest, man. It's been a long time. We were off for 4 days there. I almost forgot where I worked. I got lost a couple of times. It was a disorienting string of days. I'm very glad to be back doing this show. Anyway,
well, fortunately, somebody got you back. Somebody, it's like, dude, you got a job. How's the word to be?
No, I'm just messing. You have a good weekend, Jamarl?
Yeah, man, I had a good time. My wife threw down. Like I said it before. It felt like a family meal. Like, because typically when we get our meals for Thanksgiving, we're going to my grandmother's house, and we throw down, and everybody knows that they can end up at that house. And with her being ill this year, and with COVID and everything else, where people are kind of isolated, she basically fixed a meal as if a family was coming over for just us two, and it was everything was spectacular. So yeah, we ate.
That's awesome.
Fell asleep on the couch, woke up, ate a little bit more, fell asleep on the couch. That was our weekend.
That sounds relaxing. That sounds good.
Yes.
That sounds good. All right, let's talk more about that later during the show. First up in the headlines this morning, the total number of coronavirus cases in the United States for November surpassed 4 million on Saturday. That's more than double the record set in October of 1.9 million cases, with the total number of confirmed cases in the U.S. sitting at about 13.5 million cases now. That's out of 62.6 million cases worldwide. At least 818 new coronavirus deaths and 136,313 new cases were reported in the U.S. yesterday. Over the past week, there has been an average of 162,000 cases per day. That is an increase of 8% from the average 2 weeks earlier. New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio announced the city's plans to allow elementary school and pre-K students to return to in-person learning on December 7th. 3 days later, the city intends to welcome special education students back to in-person instruction. The in-person schooling will only be available to students who opted into at least some form of in-person learning this year, amounting to less than 335,000 children. Under the new plan, the middle and high schools would stay closed. The largest public school district in the country will adjust its testing from monthly to weekly, boost random testing, and require all in-person attendees to have consent forms to permit them to be tested or a medical exemption. The city will also get rid of its 3% test positivity threshold that triggers school closures and instead keep track of the number of classrooms in schools that close after multiple COVID-19 case confirmations. A lot of adjusting how they measure their shutdowns. Again, largest school district in the country. It makes sense that they're trying to iron that stuff out. Trump has lashed out at both the FBI and the DOJ, accusing them of working against him in his attempts to contest the legitimacy of the election. In his first interview since November 3rd, he has said he would never accept that he was beaten in the election, saying, quote, "There's no way Joe Biden got 80 million votes." We actually have a clip for this. So, Andre, let's play this clip of Trump. This is, again, his first appearance on Fox News since the election.
We won the election easily. There's no way Joe Biden got 80 million votes. I just said there's no way Joe Biden beat Barack Obama in the black communities of various cities, and then he did very badly compared to Obama in other cities throughout the United States. There's no way it happened. This election was a fraud. It was a rigged election.
He is putting it there in his. I'll just pass it over to you for a second, Jamarl. He's putting it there in very, very clear terms. What do you think of what he thinks?
Very blunt and stark terms. I know, right? I mean, look, I feel for Trump on this, believe it or not. Now, not because I think there was mass persistent fraud, but because basically if there was no mail-in ballots, do or does the Democratic Party win? And I don't think they do. Like, so, but this wasn't their fault. I mean, this was something that they were able to take advantage of because of COVID. And, so I get where Trump is like complaining about his people showed up. The Democrats' people mailed in a ballot. And what Democrats understood and what they knew is Joe Biden is an inert candidate, like you called him. I mean, people don't have this energy for Joe Biden. But if you only have to expend a tiny, tiny incremental bit of energy to just mail off a ballot where your post office guy pick it up, you could do that. You ain't have to stand in line for 5 hours. You can do that. That's not much energy at all. This is how much I care about Biden. That amount of energy. Put it in the mail. And lo and behold, is that enough to get more votes? Yeah. Why wouldn't it get more votes? It's less energy. So the fact that he beat Obama that doesn't really mean anything. I mean, this wasn't the same election where people were going out and making their votes. This was the election where people could literally mail in their ballots. And so I feel for him, but maybe he should have had a different strategy as opposed to just attacking the post office. Because Trump got 10 million more votes himself, by the way. So however, any of these guys want to think about it, look, my thought is if this wasn't a mail-in election, Trump had a really good chance of winning. And whatever you want to think of that, that's weird, that's strange, but I think is to some degree true. What do you think, Shane?
100%. Yeah, I agree with that take. And I agree with both sides of that. Like you're saying, if the mail-in ballots hadn't happened this election, then Biden would have won. I agree with that side. And then on the other hand, he probably shouldn't be complaining about that specific aspect of it. You can, if you believe that it's more likely that the mail-in ballots are going to be susceptible to fraud, and sure, criticize that, but also just change your messaging. I mean, this is a little bit of a cheap point, and I don't want to throw myself too heavily behind this, but if he had handled the pandemic better, then we wouldn't have had to rely so heavily on mail-in ballots, because people would have felt more comfortable, and they wouldn't have been prevented, frankly, in some cases, from freely going in to cast their ballots in person. So that's, again, I don't want to make too much of that because, frankly, at a certain point, it's just going to spread. It's not like we can actually shut the thing down, and it would have spread by election day in any event. But there's something to it. And more broadly, if he had changed his policies, if he'd been more appealing, then more people would have voted for him. He could have swung more of those votes from Biden, I think. He had enough time to do so. But then again, even then I could argue with myself there, of course. Media has been set against him for years and years and years and years. And that's all that most people pay attention to is what the sort of establishment media has to tell them. And so if you have the entire, optical apparatus leveled against you, then you kind of, you're going to have some problems. You're going to have a hard time.
Gold star for optical apparatus. I love that. And look, to be fair to Trump, though, he had that allowed against him the first time around, too. And like I said, he got 10 million more votes. Like, that's nothing to wink at, considering you increase your numbers with blacks and Hispanics. I think the LGBT community. Under normal circumstances, this would be a win for a Republican. Not this year.
Yeah, no, it's remarkable. We got more headlines to get to, so I'm going to go back to them. But it is remarkable. Anyway, the handover of power from Donald Trump to Joe Biden takes its first step today, with Joe Biden due to receive his first presidential daily briefing. The president-elect has also named more positions for his cabinet, including an all-female communications team. The EU, the European Union, is working on plans to reset its relations with the United States after 4 years of disagreements. That's a draft document been released calling for increased cooperation on the climate and pandemic. They are happy that Trump is due to leave the office and happy that Biden's about to step in because, of course, that'll allow them to resume more or less normal relations with the U.S. In Cuba, Cuba's President Miguel Diaz-Canel Bermudez has labeled a group of dissident artists and filmmakers in Havana known as the San Isidro Movement and a, quote, imperialist reality show, end quote. This coming a day after an agreement to open a dialogue with them. Also a day after after basically some of these guys were doing a hunger strike. I don't know. I kind of want to get somebody on about this story sometime soon. Just it's interesting, and it seems like the U.S. is, at least he's accusing the U.S. of sort of backing them, of propping this group up in some way, which wouldn't shock me. But there's also details about the local story that I don't know. One quick thing that I will throw in here, then I want to come back to the headlines. It's just, if going back to the election for a second, the biggest swing from the 2016 election to the 2020 election, if I'm remembering correctly, on election night, were the Cuban voters, the Cuban American voters, and in Florida specifically, who swung dramatically towards Trump because of sort of anti-Cuban messaging, anti-communist messaging. Anyway, it just ties into the election in an interesting way, just sort of bookmarking the story. In our next headline, the top Iranian security official says Israel used electronic devices to remotely kill military nuclear scientist Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, who had little public profile in Iran, but had been named by Israel as a prime player in what it says is Iran's nuclear weapons quest. He was killed on Friday when he was ambushed on a highway near Tehran and his car sprayed with bullets. Iran began Fakhrizadeh's burial in a cemetery in northern Tehran on Monday as the defense minister promised that the Islamic Republic would retaliate for his killing. Israeli intelligence minister Eli Cohen told radio station 103 FM on Monday that he did not know who was responsible. Jamarl, big story, big event, frankly, that, with the killing of Fakhrizadeh. I'm sure you were following this, of course. We'll come back to this throughout the show, but just in a couple of seconds, where do you think this is going to go?
It's very strange, the way that, before going into this notion of where it's going to go, just get into the strangeness of this. If this was somebody in the United States, if this was a scientist in the U.S., hair would be on fire. If this was in Europe, let's say in the UK, hair would be on fire. If this was anywhere else, with the exception of Iran, hair would be on fire. Maybe Russia, maybe China, just basically an enemy of the United States. But this news is received with the most normality in the world, in the country, in the United States. And on some level, even a mild applause from certain political corners that would be perfectly okay with this. And so I think it's bizarre that's okay. I mean, the Soleimani thing at the very least got this kind of hair on fire thing that it deserved. Just the random killing of a scientist is just very bizarre to me. It really is. I mean, just from a human aspect,
I hear you. Yeah, no, I absolutely hear you on that one. And again, within the span of a year, the killing of a top decorated military general celebrated in the country, as well as a top scientist in the country. I think again, if you imagine in the United States, it's like a top American military general and then a very well-known scientist, not quite the level of Einstein, nothing like that. Not that he's alive, of course, but like a top scientist in a field were assassinated by another country that we were at odds with on the international scene. You're right. Our hair would be on fire. We'd be going crazy. Anyway, other headlines to get to here. Leader of the Tigray region on Monday called on Ethiopia Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed to, quote, stop the madness, end quote, and withdraw troops from the region as he asserted that fighting continues on every front 2 days after Abiy declared victory. Debretsion Gebremichael said he remains near the Tigray capital, Mekele, which the Ethiopian army on Saturday said it now controlled. Far from accepting Abiy's declaration of victory, the Tigray leader asserted that, quote, we are sure we'll win, end quote. He also accused the Ethiopian forces of carrying out a genocidal campaign, quote unquote, against the Tigray people. The UN had warned of possible war crimes if the Ethiopian army attacked Mekele. Ethiopia's state-appointed Human Rights Commission has accused a Tigrayan youth group of being behind a massacre this month in which it says more than 600 non-Tigrayan civilians in the town of Mai Kadra were killed. The TPLF denied involvement in that. President-elect Joe Biden has hairline fractures. This is back to U.S. news, of course. Has hairline fractures in his midfoot and will likely require a walking boot for several weeks, his doctor said in a statement Sunday. This is after Biden slipped while playing with his dog, Major, on Saturday. Earlier Sunday, Biden's office announced he was going to be examined by an orthopedist, quote, out of an abundance of caution, end quote, after he twisted his ankle playing with the dog. On Sunday evening, President Donald Trump tweeted, quote, "Get well soon," exclamation point, end quote. Last headline here, Merriam-Webster on Monday announced pandemic as its word of the year. In its noun form, pandemic is defined by the dictionary as an outbreak of a disease that occurs over a wide geographic area, such as multiple countries or continents, and typically affects a significant proportion of the population. The World Health Organization on March 11th declared the coronavirus outbreak a pandemic. That same day, searches for the word were 115,000% higher than on the same date last year. Coronavirus and other related pandemic words, including quarantine, were among the runners-up for Merriam-Webster's word of 2020. And with that, those are our headlines. You've been listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. And we're going into our break. We'll be back in just a minute with Jamarl Thomas's monologue. Again, you guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be right back.
Fault Lines. Epidemics and pandemics could kill millions of people, and they actually did. Centuries ago, deadly outbreaks called the Black Death, the plague of Justinian, and the Spanish flu ravaged countries, empires, and whole continents. Some of these diseases are still present around the globe. Others have become a thing of the past. Discover how these ancient and not so distant outbreaks from previous centuries differ from modern-day SARS, MERS, and coronavirus pandemics. Listen to our new series, Outbreak, the deadliest epidemics in human history, this week on Radio Sputnik. Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I am joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. Also, if you're digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can send us a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. Your engagement makes the show what it is, so definitely feel free to contact us or get engaged, as we say. So let's take a look at what's taking place in our politics. It's been 4 days, so let's pull back the covers to see what both political parties are doing, or at the very least, the main people in both political parties. After all, we've just had a presidential election. Well, Trump is not faring all that well. Trump, behind a very tiny desk that I feel, to some degree, gets something exponentially across, losing it to a reporter. Let's play this clip real quick.
We won the election easily. There's no way Joe Biden got 80 million votes. I just said there's no way Joe Biden beat Barack Obama in the black communities of various cities, and then he did very badly compared to Obama in other cities throughout the United States. There's no way it happened. This election was a fraud. It was a rigged election.
Okay, this was a clip with Marie Bartiromo. I was thinking of a clip with him sitting behind a desk, and behind this tiny desk, he's basically flipping out to a reporter. I suppose on some level, Donald Trump flipping out to this reporter, he feels some kind of way. He's basically telling the guy, don't ever talk to the president like this. Don't ever talk to the president like this. He feels some kind of way. He's just lost a presidential election, and he is screaming to the hilt, fraud. Whether he's saying that because he can't accept the loss, whether he's saying that because he doesn't want to honestly own up to the loss, or whether he earnestly believes that, hey, there was something dodgy about this particular election. Donald Trump will leave, but one of the things that he's doing that I actually applaud and want him to kind of speed it up is he's trying to get his final priorities accomplished. So pulling the troops out of, let's say, Somalia, which, New York, CNN gave this kind of backhand disagreement about the policy with, or for that matter, pulling the troops from Afghanistan, pulling the troops, bringing these guys home. Yes, applaud it. Get it done as soon as possible. We've been there for 20 years. On top of that, Pardon Snowden, pardon Assange, if you really want to get on the nerves of the political establishment, which is something that it seems like you want to do, considering everything that has taken place. As for Joe Biden, as Shane mentioned, he's out of his basement for less than a week and he's already basically fell out once, injuring himself. Now, I don't know what this means for the rest of the presidency, but as Trump said, I wish him to get well soon. He is the president of the United States, after all. Now, despite Joe Biden being out of commission, he continues his persistent plight to try to get across in no uncertain terms how little he regards the opinion, the perspectives, and the feelings of the left, of progressives. What did he do this time? What possibly could he do beyond the other people that he's been bringing onto the administration that were basically these creatures of industry, people who progressives gripe at? You have one situation where the Wall Street Journal is reporting basically the companies that some of the people Joe Biden is bringing into his administration are bragging that they are going to have all sorts of buku bucks. Because, again, the people of policy, right? And if you're bringing in people that was part of this kind of industry, what do you expect to happen? What do you expect those people to actually do? On top of that, somebody who the left loves. And I'm going to just say it and read it in the way David Schuster broke the news. And he didn't break it, but I'm breaking it to you by David Schuster's tweet. When I saw a first note regarding Biden picking Neera Tanden, let that sit for a bit, Neera Tanden, to join his cabinet, I thought it was a joke. She led Hillary Clinton race-based attacks on Obama in 2008, smears on Sanders in 2016 and 2020. In fact, that part is an understatement. Opposes Medicare for all and represents the worst of corporate Democrats. Sadly, this news is real. Awful. How painful is that to read, right? As a lefty, reading that name, Neera Tanden, reading that name that you voted for that guy, and reading that name that he is bringing her into the cabinet, and there's nothing you can do about it. That he is bringing her in for Office of Budget and Management. Now, if by chance, Democrats win the 2 seats in Georgia, Sanders, supposedly, at least that's the word on the grapevine, will become, head of budgeting or one of the major head in the Senate, basically in charge of labor. I can't think of the name of the specific office, but Sanders is going to be one of the major people in labor in the Senate if he wins, if they take the Senate. She kind of puts a restraint on that. Think about the pick for the moment. She's going to be in charge of Office of Management and Budgeting. Of Budget and Management. Like, this gets into this kind of orientation of the government itself and how those things are being spent based upon the context of what the president wants to accomplish. Yes, Sanders gets neutered, even if he takes, or even if Democrats take both of those seats in the Senate. This is a dispiriting pick, right, for the cabinet. Understand, Neera Tanden was also, based on emails, making this argument that the Libyans should have to pay back the United States for basically invading the country because it's expensive to basically invade countries. And so we should get paid back. Now, if this sounds familiar, this sounds a lot like Donald Trump's argument about Iraq. You will be right. I guess my point is this. This is not a chest thump. This is not a I was right. This is not a rubbing your nose in it. This is none of that stuff. None of that stuff. Very basic. My argument was never that you should vote for Trump. My argument was never to attack Biden with the idea of getting Trump in office. My argument was always push Biden, because if you don't, you get nothing out of this. Meaning, it doesn't matter, or it does matter, that Biden won the presidential election, but there's also something to be said about pressure that can be applied to Biden. If there's no pressure applied to Biden, if there's nothing where Biden believes he can win, where Biden doesn't necessarily make any promises, or at the very least say, I'm going to do X, Y, Z in very clear terms. Obama at the very least screamed about healthcare. He said it so many times he knew what he was talking about. I'm saying by not doing something similar for Biden, you create a situation where whatever he does, you have no power in that process. Think about it for the moment. If you would have pushed him, well, you would have at the very least not been so willing to go automatically. if you weren't so willing to just give up the vote tally, when the people ask you, who are you voting for? Yes, I'm voting for Biden. I need to get Trump out of office. Trump is scared. He's terrifying. He's terrifying. I'm saying now that all of this is settled. Biden has won this election. Trump is talking about he's going to leave. Biden, at this point, you can look at it in two ways. Either he's trying to slap the left by putting in these people who are just the worst. I mean, even bringing up Rahm Emanuel is astonishing, considering Rahm Emanuel hid the execution of a person and hid the fact that Chicago, one of the major cities in the United States, was full of lead. Hid that. While this was going on in Flint, which is utterly astonishing. Go back and look at the papers in that. It's utterly astonishing that Rahm Emanuel was able to get with that. I'm making the point that these are the creatures, the swamp monsters, that Joe Biden is talking about bringing into his cabinet. And it is painful to know that many of the left voted for this. Now, understand they believe they didn't have anywhere else to go. I would argue you did. Even if it was pushing, even if it was, you're not going to get from me, even if you didn't mean it, you were better off making that case, making that argument, where you had to work for it. You had to, at the very least, show a little bit of leg, show a little bit of interest. But that's not what happened. And so here we are. Rahm Emanuel potentially coming into the cabinet. Neera, Tanden, oh God, the worst of creatures. She's so bad. Do you realize she attacked Sanders' campaign head at one point? That was when he used to work for her. But I'm just making the point of the character that this person is and the level of resentment she's shown over the course of her time towards the left. Please, in 4 years, when the opportunity comes again, don't give undying allegiance and support to the candidate without getting any concessions in return. Because even if you don't win the race, that doesn't necessarily mean that you can't necessarily wield power from a distance or with power in this kind of, not necessarily directly, but at the very least tangentially. And one of those ways of doing it is the ensuring that that person knows that he could potentially lose without your vote. If you're willing to give it all, you're going to get results like this. Shane, I don't know how much you pay attention to politics on the left, but Neera Tanden is as worse as it gets. And you should see the litany, the cacophony of complaints, of whining and crying about this particular pick. And David Schuster, he said, I thought they were joking. Like, I thought this was an episode of The Onion. It's not. Joe Biden just doesn't care what the left thinks. Or, worse, he's apathetic. It can't be, it's only one of those. Which one is it, Shane? Is he apathetic or he just doesn't care?
I think that they're all swamp creatures, to use the Trumpian term. I think that that's where this is coming in. I mean, I've heard her name before, and I was familiar with her, but I don't follow left-wing politics too closely. She's the head of the center, current president of the Center for American Progress. She took over after John Podesta. In my book, that's bad enough. But give me the dirt, man. You were just talking about some of it. Her coming out against Bernie's campaign manager back in the day. What else has she done? What's on her role there? So
she worked. So Bernie Sanders, what is Faiz Shakir? He used to work for her, and apparently he wrote an article, either critical of Clinton. I believe it was critical of Clinton, and she ends up like attacking him, like physically assaulting him. And then when mentioned it, she was like, I didn't physically assault him. I just like shoved him. And somebody kind of made the point to her, like, dude, you realize that's physically assaulting. Like, that's still assault, right? Like, they're still attacking the guy. I told you about the Libya stuff. The argument that, that Libya should basically pay for itself if it's going to be invaded. Like, think about that. Like, that's the argument that Trump made and that the liberals lost their mind over. He was like, hey, we should have taken the oil from Iraq so it could pay for itself. She basically made the same argument about Libya. I mean, she has been attacking Sanders relentlessly, anything that has to do with the left, relentlessly. You should look at her on MSNBC. She never has a good word to say about the left. So, yeah, the left was not happy with this pick, to put it mildly. And again, at a certain point, it's either he is so apathetic where he just doesn't care, or he's trying to do it to make the point you have nowhere else to go and I'm going to rub your nose in it. Whether I say I'm going to veto Medicare for all, or for that matter, I'm not for defund the police or whatever other, policy that he basically attacked the left on. No, I'm not for the Green New Deal. Like, he's very clear. I'm not for the things that you guys are saying you guys are for, and you're not going to do anything about it, even when it comes down to somebody like her. That's my thought. I mean, it's one or the other, and I don't necessarily know which one, and I think apathy is even worse, if I'm being honest. Even if you hate me, if you need to hate me, but don't be apathetic towards me.
Yeah, I'm not going to, we got to go into a break. I'm not going to impute an emotional motivation here, any kind of, that kind of motivation. Like I said before, I think they're both swamp creatures. I think they're both sort of just supporting the interests of the establishment that they're a part of, the establishment that feeds them, so to speak, the DNC and some of the intelligence community too. At any event, we've got to go into a break. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in just a minute with Laith Marouf.
Fault Lines.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
What's the most important hour of the day? It's the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon. On this show, we don't just deliver the latest headlines. We divide the real from the fake. Tune in to hear from some of the most brilliant political minds of today. Get in-depth news and analysis that goes beyond the surface and digs straight into the details. Set your clock to the Critical Hour for a news perspective unlike any of those other guys. Tune in to the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon, weekdays 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern, and catch us on Facebook Live. You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, and we are joined by Laith Marouf. He is an award-winning multimedia producer and media policy and law consultant focused on issues of liberation and decolonization from indigenous nations to Arab peoples, and focused on building broadcasting capabilities for misrepresented and underrepresented communities around the world. Laith, thank you for joining us. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing good. It's always great to be with you guys.
It's great to have you back. Thank you again for being with us. Normally, we brought you on to talk about Lebanese issues and specifically the sort of aftermath of the bombing, the explosion, whatever you want to call it, in Beirut. We're actually turning slightly as we bring you on this time to talk about what happened in Iran with the assassination of Mohsen Fakhrizadeh. Could you please just give us a little bit of background? I want to cover a couple of different sides of this. Who was he? Who was this? Who was the scientist who was killed? Nuclear research scientist. Who was he? What role did he play in Iran's academia? Laith.
So Professor Fakhrizadeh is the top nuclear physicist in Iran. He kind of is called the father of the Iranian project, nuclear project. He had taught hundreds of students in Iranian universities on nuclear physics, and has been also in charge of the corona vaccine project in Iran before his assassination. So he's credited for much of the development of the Iranian nuclear project and much more.
Laith, can you discuss the weird, I guess, the hit? I mean, that's what it looks like. I mean, it seems like there was an automated car, and then apparently he gets out to check after the car is shot, and then some kind of an automatic machine gun or automatic gun goes off that kills him. Can you give us details in regards to, the odd surroundings of the killing? And for that matter, who's the culprit? Who's being basically pointed out as the person who's responsible?
So just, less than 2 hours ago, the funeral was held for Professor Fakhrizadeh, and right after the Iranian establishment announced the preliminary details of the assassination. And, many people thought this was an attack by a cell that was controlled by apartheid Israel or the United States. But it turns out that actually it was all automated through satellite. There was nobody on the ground directing the assassination hit. As you mentioned, there was a kind of a van, one of those U-Haul trucks kind of situation that was driving on the same road that Mr. Fakhrizadeh was on. And, there was an automated machine gun controlled through satellite that shot at his car. And that's how he was injured and eventually died in the hospital. And they couldn't save him. So what we have right now is something that never has happened before. It's very unusual, and it clearly shows that there is high intelligence coordination by somebody that has access to satellite controls of mechanisms. So, whoever did it could not be anybody less than the United States and apartheid Israel.
And Laith, could you please also take us back to the earlier assassinations? This has been happening for years, is the thing. So I believe back in 2014, not that long ago. That could have been more than that at this point. Other nuclear scientists in Iran were also assassinated. Laith, please take it away.
Yeah, so at least 4 Iranian nuclear scientists were assassinated in 2010 and 2012. So these were the Obama-Biden years. And so what we know right now is that doesn't matter who's in charge in the United States, they will be pursuing assassinations as a means of war. And, the person that Biden right now picked to be the Minister of, Secretary of Defense was quoted multiple times in the years of Obama supporting such actions. So it will not matter that Biden comes into power. He will not be limiting such illegal activities, and which means that Iran has no choice but to retaliate, because there will be no difference even if a change of power happens in Washington.
What does the retaliation look like? And I kind of want to ask this in 2 ways. From the standpoint of, I made the point to Shane earlier when we were talking in headlines, that it is very bizarre that the way we in the West take someone being assassinated in somebody else's country as opposed to in the United States. If that happened in any other country that was in, let's say, the UK, Ireland, the United States, Canada, there would be hysteria associated with it, with consequences demanded. And yet, when something like this happens in Iran, in the West, there seems to be no reaction. Like, what is that like from the standpoint of being internally to the country itself and knowing that outside the world considers this to some degree okay? Or there seems to be this kind of selective judgment in regards to being okay with murders in some places or assassinations in some places but not others?
Yeah, I mean, it's mind-boggling, especially that, a few months ago, we were told Russia attempted to assassinate an opposition figure, Navalny, and supposedly by poisoning him on its own territory in Russia. And the man was rushed to Germany, and Germany made the claims that there was, a poisoning attempt on him. There's no evidence, obviously, that has been handed over to Russia. But in retaliation for this supposed assassination attempt, which Navalny survived, Germany and much of Europe started adding sanctions on Russia. And if we remember a few years ago, the supposed other assassination attempt, the Skripal in England, that led to huge pressures being added on Russia and sanctions and, condemnations by much of the West. So here we have the chief nuclear scientist of Iran being assassinated openly, and all the European Union can come up with is a mild condemnation and requests for Iran not to retaliate. And so, we do live in a bizarre world that is being more and more exposed, the hypocrisy in how major players discuss human rights and international law.
And it's another aspect of this that's bizarre, and people who've been following America's relationship with Iran, specifically the right wing of America's relationship with Iran for years, they're familiar with the term, the group, the MEK, the People's Mujahideen, which is a sort of a main opposition group in Iran, but a weirdly cult-like group from what I've heard. And they seem to have been involved in this recent assassination, as they were in the other assassinations that we were talking about a couple of minutes ago, back from 2010 to 2012. Can you please take us through just a little bit of who the MEK is and what they do, Laith?
So Mujahideen Khalq is definitely a cult. Not only is it family controlled, now the head of the MEK was the wife of the original founder, but also its members are their marriages, their children, their sex life, their education is all controlled, and there's these kind of camps in Albania and France where they are held, the members of MEK, and are directed by various intelligence services, including the French intelligence services, to commit their crimes in Iran. Now, one thing that we have to remember is that actually the MEK were tools of Saddam Hussein in Iraq, and he used them to attack Iran during that American-supported war against Iran from 1979 to 88, and they after the collapse of Saddam's government, the United States basically adopted them, and the French intelligence became their main operator. So this is what we have: is it's a cult of personality that also is like a sex cult that is operated by the French intelligence directly now.
Yeah, very strange. I mean, even some of the characters in the United States that ends up associated with the people of MEK, it was very, very weird. But I want to get into something before we go into let's do this. We can take an early break, but you could be thinking about it. What does the retaliation looks like? Meaning, the first time around when the United States assassinated, murdered Soleimani, basically there was an attack on the base. And there was this kind of issue where Donald Trump at that point lost all control to prevent a war. Meaning, it was open. Because however Iran responded, it could have taken it to the point where there was, basically no coming back. And that would have been all entirely because of Donald Trump's assassination on that one. So in this very specific case where it's kind of open, what does retaliation look like? Who will it be aimed at in this very specific case? Is it just aimed at Israel immediately? And what does that look like from that standpoint? Is it aimed at America or both? I guess think about it, and we're going to come back to it. This is Laith Marouf, award-winning multimedia producer and media policy law consultant focused on issues of liberation and decolonialization from indigenous nations to Arab peoples and building broadcasting capabilities for misrepresented and underrepresented communities around the world. Let's take a break. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
Fault Lines. Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
Are you bored? Are you lonely? Do you need a hug? Well, we can't give you that, but We can keep you up to date on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live from Washington, D.C. Joining us is Laith Marouf, award-winning multimedia producer and media policy law consultant focused on issues of liberation and decolonialization from indigenous nations to Arab peoples and building broadcasting capabilities for misrepresented and underrepresented communities around the world. Laith, again, welcome back, man. We always appreciate it when you come on.
Thank you, guys.
So before we left off, I asked what basically is a response here. I mean, this is very bizarre. I mean, you have basically a automatic car that seems to be automated gun to, this kind of assassination basically done with technology. Who does Iran hit here? And who is the response leveled at? And what does it mean to have a proportional response for something like this?
These are now, big questions that everybody is wondering about. Surely apartheid Israel is in chaos right now in terms of figuring out how the response will come. They probably also have calculated these things and thought about them. And maybe they have a few things that they haven't thought about that Iran may respond with. Just hours ago, the Emirati government came out with a statement condemning the assassination. Bahrain did the same, and those are clear indications that Bahrain and the Emirates are really worried that Iran may retaliate on their territory because of their security coordination and normalization with apartheid Israel. I'm sure also Saudi-occupied Arabia is also very worried because the assassination happened days after the secret meeting between Netanyahu, MBS, and Pompeo in North Arabia. And so there's also all the Israeli embassies around the world are on high alert. We know that the armed Israeli military across the border from Syria and Lebanon is now on highest alert. We also know that Hezbollah itself is on highest alert right now. So, there could be multiple targets. This time I am kind of have the feeling that it will be something more drastic than the immediate retaliation against the assassination of General Soleimani in January. But, one thing that we should remember from the assassination of Soleimani, the response to it was an attack on the major American base in Iraq, which has been emptied right now. The Americans removed all their soldiers from there. At that time, that came within 24 hours of the assassination, and it, hit all the command center in the base. For weeks after the United States was pretending that some of its soldiers died in mysterious cases around the world in different bases to probably cover up the actual dead that were in the Ain al-Assad base in Iraq. And if you remember, Trump at the time, after the Iranian retaliation, came out and said, everything's fine, trying to minimize the possibility of the United States being dragged into a war. We don't know if this time, if the retaliation happens against apartheid Israel or one of the other vessels in the Gulf, how the United States, given that Trump is on his last days, would he drag the United States into a bigger confrontation that will entangle the coming President Biden?
And that's one of the main parts of the timing of this, people wondering whether or not this is an effort by elements of the Trump administration, again, working with Israel to try to get the U.S. into another war that would potentially affect his possibility of staying in office, or at the very least, at the very least, steer U.S. foreign policy coming into a Biden administration. Is there anything else that you see? Is there, when it comes to timing, when it comes to why this happened now? Just looking at this from a couple of different angles, you could also talk about this, the sort of strategic, apparent strategic benefit to Israel, the U.S., or other parties of killing this specific person and how that would affect Iran's nuclear program. But just from the timing, why do you think this has happened now?
So in terms of affecting the Iranian nuclear program, I don't think this will slow the development. I remember Professor Fakhrizadeh had taught hundreds of scientists in Iran. He's more looked at as a manager of the program, and what people credit him with is how he was able to break down the responsibilities of this development and the development of the missile program of Iran into various, portfolios. So it is not like a centralized situation where if you take him out, there is, a slowdown of development. On the contrary, right now, the Iranian parliament had indicated that they will be giving up all their responsibilities within the nuclear agreement that the United States withdrew from. So there would be an increase in enrichment, and this will add more pressures, obviously. I want to say about in terms of the timing, it is obvious that, the United States was going to be confrontational with Iran no matter who's in power. Now, does that mean that Biden would have confronted Iran immediately when he came into power? Of course not. There's, a new government coming in. He has to hire all these people, change all these bureaucracies. And any more pressures or confrontation with Iran would have been probably delayed for at least a year. So the timing of it right now is to not allow this respite of pressure on Iran that could have happened with the change of guard in the United States. So that is the main objective of it, to continue this path and not slow it down, even though that it would have been back at the same square a year from now with Biden.
Oh, wow. That brings in two really good questions that are somewhat in opposite tracks. I mean, if you know that, and look, I agree with you, right? That basically Donald Trump is trying to sew up his loose ends before he leaves office. So that's pardoning some people that he wants to pardon. That is getting the troops out of Afghanistan. But one of the things that he was clear with was also conflict with Iran. And so if Iran knows that, then doesn't that, create this kind of crisis of action? Do you take an action that will basically create a conflict later on with a new administration that's coming in, with the action being the sole point of view to do something like that? Or do you not act and allow this kind of tit for tat where there is no tat, allowing this kind of free hand of an antagonizer or of a belligerent nation? How does that get balanced? I mean, because, I think you're right. And if you are right, how does Iran dance between the politics or dance between the raindrops? Now, it did amazing politics when he was trying to keep the JCPOA in effect. And it seems like this action is specifically done so that would not get put back in place.
Yeah, I mean, it probably, for me at least, I believe that Iran has no choice but to retaliate as fast as possible and as hard as possible. And the targets must be of the value of Professor Fakhrizadeh. Because, right now, the only thing that is allowing Iran to be relatively safe in comparison to the rest of the region is its ability to project power and defense of its realm. So it's similar with Hezbollah in Lebanon. It's a very small group, 60 to 80,000 fighters maximum, the whole structure. But apartheid Israel thinks a million times before damaging Hezbollah, because it knows the retaliation will come and it will exact a revenge on, So it's been now 4 months that the Israeli army on its highest alert because of the mistake of assassinating a member of Hezbollah in Damascus. So what we have here is that if Iran doesn't retaliate right now with equal measure, if not more, it will lose deterrence. And this is non-acceptable because it will mean tomorrow another scientist or even maybe somebody higher up in the political spheres of Iran would be assassinated, and therefore they can't afford not waiting for Biden or anything like that.
Of course, the other side of this, though, is that assuming a retaliation from Iran, that risks quickly spiraling out of control. And then the balance of power right now, despite what you just said, the balance of power, as far as I can tell, would be in favor simply because of the sheer size of the United States' army and military and ability to project naval and air power and all that stuff. Balance of power is off. So how do you see that working out? If it escalates not just into a retaliation and a tit for tat, but into a full-blown regional war, let alone something wider, what's Iran's calculus from your perspective there, Laith?
Look, the United States can destroy any country on this planet. That doesn't mean that we will not all die together. And so, sure, the United States can destroy Iran. But if it does attack nuclear reactors of Iran, that means nuclear fallout on the whole region. And this is where it boggles my mind when Israel or the United States talk about attacking nuclear reactors. This is basically a nuclear bomb if you attack a nuclear reactor. So, but in the same time that we can clearly recognize that the United States can destroy Iran, we also must recognize that Iran can destroy all the American bases in the region, and they can destroy all the vessels of the United States, Saudi Arabia and all of its infrastructure, the glass skyscrapers in Dubai and Abu Dhabi, the whole apartheid Israel could be carpet bombed with hundreds of thousands of missiles that are, guided and smart. So the outcome in the end will be the destruction of the ability of the United States to project its power into Western Asia. And this is the whole battle is about that. And the United States must calculate that. And then the American people must recognize that the cost of maintaining hegemony over Western Asia and North Africa will be tens of thousands of American soldiers dead, and they must hold their government responsible.
Laith, we have about 2 minutes left. I am enamored by the politics of internally to the nations themselves and how the public, not to mention the political devices, handles and deals with various things that happens, environmental issues. Well, this is an environmental issue. I mean, yeah, it's foreign policy, but how does the public itself regard this? And how does the politics, meaning the political apparatus that has to basically deal with this, regard it?
In Iran right now, President Rouhani and Foreign Minister Zarif are under a lot of pressure because these are the moderates that were elected to try to create a peace deal with the United States and the rest of the Western powers and pushed for this nuclear agreement. And in the end, the result was zero. And actually, assassinations and attacks on very high personalities in Iran. So whatever happens today is, you could see in Iran, there's a lot of anger. And every time I post, for instance, about this issue right now on Facebook and Twitter, I get a lot of Iranians attacking Rouhani and Zarif on my feed. I'm shocked that they are actually blaming them and their moderate liberal position of trying to create an agreement with the West for dragging the country this far.
Laith, that is fascinating. Wow, that is fascinating. The voice you guys have been listening to is Laith Marouf, award-winning multimedia producer and media policy law consultant focused on issues of liberation and decolonialization from indigenous nations to Arab peoples and building broadcasting capabilities for misrepresented and underrepresented communities around the world. You can find Laith on Twitter at Laith Marouf and his website, cmacentre.org. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment with headlines.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault Lines.
Live from the divided states of America, welcome to your daily inoculation for propaganda. In the left corner, I am the indefatigable, the ever-vigilant, the last antibody to a sick and seizing political system. Your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And in the independent corner, I am your political and institutional analyst, Shane Stranahan.
You are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. So let's get to the headlines. In the news, the total number of coronavirus cases in the United States for November surpassed 4 million on Saturday, more than double the record set in October of 1.9 million cases, with the total right now sitting at about 13.5 million cases in the United States out of 62.6 million cases worldwide. At least 818 new coronavirus deaths and 136,313 new cases were reported in the United States yesterday. Over the past week, there have been an average of 162,007 cases per day, an increase of 8% from the average 2 weeks earlier. New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio announced the city's plan to allow elementary school and PK students to return to in-person learning on December 7th. 3 days later, the city intends to welcome special education students back to in-person instruction. The in-person schooling will only be available to students who opted in at least some form of in-person learning this year, amounting to less than 335,000 students. Under the new plan, the middle and high school would stay closed. The largest public school district in the country will adjust its testing from monthly to weekly, boost random testing, and require in-person attendees to have consent forms to permit them to be tested for or are medically exempt. The city will also get rid of its 3% test positivity threshold that triggers school closures and instead keep track of the number of classrooms and schools that close after multiple COVID-19 case confirmations. Trump has lashed out at both the FBI and the Department of Justice, accusing them of working against him in his attempts to contest the legitimacy of the election. In his first interview since November 3rd, he has said that he would never accept that he was beaten in the election, saying, quote, "There is no way Joe Biden got 80 million more votes," unquote. We have a clip of that. He's talking to Maria Bartiromo on Fox. Let's hear the clip of Trump.
We won the election easily. There's no way Joe Biden got 80 million votes. I just said there's no way Joe Biden beat Barack Obama in the black communities of various cities, and then he did very badly compared to Obama in other cities throughout the United States. There's no way it happened. This election was a fraud. It was a rigged election.
This election was a fraud. This was a rigged election. Well, Donald Trump, despite the allegations of fraud and despite making the point that he won this election easily, the handover of power from Trump to Biden is going to take his first steps today, with Joe Biden due to receive his first presidential daily briefing. The president-elect has also named more positions for his cabinet, including an all-female communications team, because, you know, who needs healthcare when you can have an all-female communications team? Shane, what do you think about that clip? He seems really defiant angry. And if he's lying, this doesn't come across as if he thinks he's lying. I could be wrong. I'm just going by some of the lies that Trump has told in the past. And one of the things about Trump that's really good is he's a clear liar. Like, he's not a good one. Like, he would lie as easily as breathing, but oftentimes you can say, that guy's lying. That guy's, right there, he's lying. This doesn't come across that way. He seemed genuinely upset. And he seemed genuinely confused. How does Joe Biden get more black votes than Obama? That should never happen. What do you think about it?
I think you hit it right on the nose. I think when you said the bit about the mail-in ballots, I think that's the key missing piece here. But I agree with you. He's not lying. And, compared to other election cycles, he has reason to be frustrated, because if it weren't for the pandemic, if it weren't for the fact that people were using mail-in ballots, he probably would have won this thing, which if you just back up for a second, it's kind of shocking, actually. We were talking in the last headline segment an hour ago about how the media is set against him and has been for 4 years. With all of that, with all of the constant haranguing, the attempted impeachment. How often is it you get an attempted impeachment? He would have won, by all appearances at least. And that says something. And what it says, frankly, is not that Trump is a good candidate, but it says something, I think, about where the Democratic Party is on the one hand and where the American people are on the other. And I think that what I'm a bit worried about, but also certain, pretty darn certain of, is that the establishment, the political establishment specifically, has not learned their lesson from 2016. They have not learned the sort of fundamental and valid concerns that a lot of Americans have, not just with our foreign policy, but with our economic policy, disprivileging certain classes, et cetera. There's a whole conversation to have there, but they have not learned the severity of the lesson that they should have learned. And that's, of course, setting them up for future crises. And we're going to be living through those, at least ideally we will, in the sense that we'll still be alive to see them. But that's all coming back.
Is there
one
a
other
lesson
quick
to
thing
learn
here.
I mean, what would have the lesson been? What did Donald Trump do that was so drastically different than what, let's say, a Democrat or let's say a regular Republican? Yes, the TPP, that's one thing. And you got...
He said that America is... Real quick, he said that America is no longer great. He said that America should become great again. Simply admitting that America is and has been in a downward slump and that it needs to go through some serious recovery, whatever that looks like. If you have a populist lefty saying that kind of thing, he's going to get votes because, frankly, it's accurate. So saying America is not the beacon on the hill that it once was or once was perceived to have been, and that there are serious underlying problems that we need to solve in our country. And frankly, that's just a message that's a true message, and therefore it's one that's going to sell.
No, I agree with that. That's a fair point. And then he gave the largest tax cut in the history of tax cuts.
Yeah, true. I'm not trying to defend Trump.
No, I'm not. I don't think you're trying to defend Trump. I guess my thing is, it's like, even when somebody who is considered a populist, because you're right, Trump had the nerve to say it, we're going to make America great again. And yes, there's a kind of racist overtone to that, or undertone, whichever one you call it. But he said it.
Totally.
He also was willing to pull the troops back, even if it was just rhetoric, right? He actually tried. He's trying to do it now. Like, there were things about him that he did differently. The Trans-Pacific Partnership, putting a bullet in that, with this notion of this kind of nationalism about talking about doing reinvigorating stuff on the home front. But even with a candidate like that, at the end of the day, he still did the tax cuts. He still did the policy of the oligarchs in that case. Meaning, it's like, even with the populists on the right, you still ended up with the swamp. I don't know, man. I just think that's like, it's dispiriting in a weird way. It's dispiriting in a weird way. We can go back to it. I mean, it's just, well, we have this conversation about Trump and everything else, and it's like about Biden. And you're right, it says something about how little Biden was offering, that Trump was able to do that. And to be honest, how little people felt like they wanted something different. I mean, when he got 10 million more votes, despite all of these people dying and everything else. So there's something that's being said there. And I guess my feeling is there's no lesson to learn from the oligarchs or the establishment, because basically they still got what they wanted. And now with Biden, even if it was wishy-washy every 4 years, so what? They still get what they want in the end. I guess I don't see how that's a loss for them. And I don't see how that's them learning anything. When you could get somebody like Cornel West to vote for Joe Biden, I don't know how that's a loss.
Well, and here's the other side of it. I would say that we got to go back to headlines. I would say that it is a loss because there are oligarchs within this country who are, if the American state, the American economy continues to decline as it appears to be, even though, nominally the stock market is doing well. But if you look at the currency exchange rates, things aren't so rosy. Anyway, if you look at you'd think, okay, if we're all on the Titanic and the Titanic is going down, surely they're going to try to get out the lifeboats, but they will. They'll get on them. They have tax exempt status and go to other countries. So I'm cynical about this stuff, but I think there's a real opportunity for the American people, to the extent that it's possible, to educate themselves, to organize themselves, and to try real damn hard to fix the problems, because you're pretty darn confident, at least I am, that the political class isn't going to do it.
No,
they're blinding themselves.
They're not. No, I agree with you on that, Shane, 1,000%. The European Union is working on plans to reset its relations to the United States after 4 years of disagreements. A draft document calls for increased cooperation on the climate and the pandemic. Cuba's President Miguel Diaz-Canel Bermudez has labeled a group of dissident artists and filmmakers in Havana known as San Isidro Movement an imperialist reality show. This coming a day after an agreement to open a dialogue with them. Very interesting. A top Iranian security official, says Israel used electronic device to remotely kill military nuclear scientists. Moshe Fakhrizadeh. Shane, you nailed this, so I'm going to ask you to help me pronounce that last name.
I believe it's Fakhrizadeh.
Fakhrizadeh, okay. Moshe Fakhrizadeh, who had little public profile in Iran, but has been named by Israel as a prime player in what it says is Iran's nuclear weapons quest, was killed on Friday when he was ambushed on a highway near Tehran and his car sprayed with bullets. Iran began Fakhrizadeh's burial in a cemetery in northern Tehran on Monday, as Defense Minister promised that Islamic Republic would retaliate for his killing. Israeli Intelligence Minister Eli Cohen told radio station 103 FM on Monday that he did not know who was responsible. Sure you don't. The leader of the Tigray region on Monday called on Ethiopia's Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed to, quote, stop the madness, unquote, and withdraw troops from the region, as he asserted that fighting continues on every front 2 days after Abiy declared victory. Debresten Gabe Michael said he remains near the Tigray capital, Mekelle, which the Ethiopian army on Saturday said it now controlled. Far from accepting Abiy's declaration of victory, the Tigray's leader asserted that, quote, we are sure we'll win, unquote. He also accused the Ethiopian forces of carrying out a genocidal campaign against the Tigray people. The UN has warned of possible war crimes if the Ethiopian army attacked Mekelle. Ethiopia's state-appointed Human Rights Commission has accused a Tigrayan youth group of being behind a massacre this month, in which it says more than 600 non-Tigrayan civilians in the town of Mai Kadra were killed. The TPLF denied involvement. President-elect Joe Biden has hairline fractures in his midfoot and will likely require a boot for several weeks, his doctor said in a statement Sunday, after Biden slipped while playing with his dog Major on Saturday. Earlier Sunday, Biden's office announced he was going to be examined by an orthopedist out of an abundance of caution after he twisted his ankle playing with his dog. On Sunday evening, President Donald Trump tweeted, "Get well soon!" exclamation point. Merriam-Webster on Monday announced pandemic as its word of the year. In its noun form, pandemic is defined by the dictionary as an outbreak of a disease that occurs over a wide geographic area, such as multiple countries or continents, and typically affects a significant proportion of the population. The World Health Organization on March 11th declared the coronavirus outbreak a pandemic. The same day, searches for the word were 115,806% higher than on the same date last year. Coronavirus and other related pandemic words, including quarantine, were among the runners-up for the Merriam-Webster's Word of 2020. And those are your headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. So, wow, that's so weird. That's the up and coming word of the year. But let's do this. Let's go into a break, and I want to get into a story of CNN reported actually talking about a CIA officer that was killed in combat in Somalia. Now, the moment that I say that, you should be like, "Wow, that's interesting. When is the last time you've heard of a CIA agent killed in Somalia?" Yeah, exactly. I haven't either. So let's talk about this afterwards. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
Fault Lines. Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
Feeling kind of blue, but maybe also kind of red, and kind of purple, and kind of alone? You've got a friend on Radio Sputnik. Tune into Political Misfits from 12 to 2 Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, for news, politics, and culture without the two-party bias. Catch us daily on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Or find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your news.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in DC. If you guys are in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are throwing down, whatever platform you're consuming us on, definitely give us a like and share that audio or video. And if you want to join in on the conversation, like right now, you can send us a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. This is an open segment, so your calls are going to be honored. And look, your engagement really does make the show what it is, so definitely feel free to call in. The story I want to get to is a CIA officer killed in Somalia. This is fascinating to me, not because the agent was killed, more so because we're hearing about it. And this little line within the second paragraph, I think, nails it. This is CNN. A CIA officer was killed in Somalia last weekend, according to former senior administration officials with knowledge of the matter. The officer was wounded in an operation in the country and later died, the source said. The identity of the officer has not been made public, but the source said the officer was a former Navy SEAL. Right here. The death comes as Trump administration is making plans to withdraw more than 600 troops from Somalia in the near future. So,
fantastic.
The reason I'm hearing about this is because Trump wants to get rid of them from Somalia. And by the way, troops. We're talking about troops. We're not talking about CIA agents. Supposedly, there's a difference between the military, right, and the CIA, even though they might end up in the same area of operations. I'm just making the point that the only reason you're hearing about this Somali CIA agent killed was because Donald Trump is trying to move the troops out before he leaves office as one of his campaign promises. And CNN, all these other media outlets that basically are arm in arm with the intelligence community. I mean, for God's sake, they have John Brennan or Clapper as a mouthpiece on the network, giving you direct, from the horse's mouth of sorts. And so now they're telling you about this agent, the secret agent. And by the way, a leak. It has to be a leak, right? Otherwise, how are you hearing about an agent that's been killed when you don't even know the guy's name? What do you think, Shane? Are you hearing about this because Donald Trump is trying to pull the troops out, or are you hearing about this just as a by the way? Which one?
That's a good question, actually. Yeah, I think that you're onto something with the theory. I mean, of course, the idea here is they're making us aware of the fact that somebody just died. That's sort of, in some sense, it could be seen as a justification for staying there. Of course, my thought is, if we have people over there who are dying, should we really be there? You can kind of take it in both directions. In other words, do we want? It's not just about vengeance or whatever. Do we want to stay there if our people are going to keep dying? Well, you can go either way, depending on whether or not you think it's worth it. So it's sort of I don't know, tangential or oblique. But That's one side of it. It could be coming out because they're having to add this guy's star to the wall, where the CIA has a tradition, memorial wall, sort of commemorating people whose lives were lost while they were in service. And maybe just because the CIA, even though they've declined to comment on the story, maybe news got out somehow. I don't know exactly why the leak happened, but I mean, here's another side of it. Why was the dude there? Why are we there in general? It's because of al-Shabaab. It's because of the spread of sort of this ISIS Islamist movement that we frankly have backed for decades now in one form or another, where first it was the U.S., of course, backing al-Qaeda during our war with the Soviets, during the sort of very tail end stages of the Cold War. And then now it's moved into us backing various ISIS affiliates in Syria and regionally. When it suits our interest. Not saying we're backing al-Shabaab, but we're sort of feeding one of the heads of the Hydra and then trying to slash another off. You're gonna have a bad time. You're gonna have problems if you try to play that sort of insurgent warfare, because frankly, if we're trying to exert control over these countries, which we are destabilizing, then you're sort of setting yourself up for this perpetual cycle of instability and violence in regions, and then you pretend to feel the need to step in to calm the situation down, and it just keeps going. It's a turbine for making money for companies in the military-industrial complex, and of course, we're perpetuating the felt need to maintain our military presence overseas. Jamarl, I went over a bunch of stuff there. What's your take on that?
So I would say, this is one of those things where, so if I am media. The United States often, especially from the standpoint of media, it's assumed that if we're somewhere around the world, meaning if that guy's in Somalia, if that guy's in, Nigeria, if that guy's wherever, that he's doing something good. And we may make mistakes, but we are making them in a good conscience, meaning whatever that person was doing in Somalia, he was doing something good and noble for the United States, fighting for that country in some way, fighting terrorism. Like, that's the assumption, right? That's the way our media always frames these stories. It's never framed it as if Trump is stealing the oil in Syria. He's doing that. Or, hey, we killed 500,000 people provoking a war. Or, and what Obama even calls as his own, his biggest failure, the Libya conflict. And the person who's Biden bringing back to the office, what do you know? In multiple cases, not just Neera Tanden, but also, I can't think of the gentleman's name, but one of the other people bringing into his cabinet has been involved in pretty much every war going back for the last 20 years. And so, I mean, I don't take this as CNN is putting this out as a, by the way, that the question becomes, why are they there? I take it as typically the question becomes, if the guy's there, he's doing it for good ends. And why is Trump taking the troops out if people are still dying there? With this kind of implicit assumption that if the guy died there, that something has to be going on that requires the person to still be there, and Trump is pulling him out. That's the way I took it.
I hear you.
And I get the feeling that I think America takes it that way. I mean, just from the way that have you ever heard media frame an attack that we're doing or an attack that we're involved in as something other than us doing for the best of reasons? I'm unaware of it.
Yeah, body bags. I mean, frankly, I have heard this. Body bags with the as the Iraq War was ongoing, not just in its relatively early stages, where bodies were coming back home, and there was this constant questioning. The sort of bell was ringing in your heads for a lot of people. Why are we still overseas? Why are we still doing this? Thousands, tens of thousands of people are dying, coming home in body bags. That's the sort of the symbolism, the imagery that sticks out to me. There is that symbolism in recent American military mythological history comes to mind. And I think that'll reassert itself. Having said that, I think that very few people heard about this story. Very few people are aware of this. This might have been set up as one of the earlier stories in a drip campaign that could be used to justify staying in Somalia. So I see what you're saying, but you could take it in the opposite direction too. I think real quick, we've got a caller. But the guy you were talking about was Tony Blinken, right?
That's him.
You said there's
that's him. Tony
exactly.
Blinken. Yeah, Biden is bringing the guy.
By the way,
cabinet.
Yeah. Yes. Exactly. Anyway, but not just into his cabinet, as the Secretary of State. I mean, not just as a sort of lower ranking sort of official or a national security advisor, as his Secretary of State, as his foreign policy dude. The White House's big foreign policy guy. He's bringing in Tony Blinken, who, like you said, been involved in wars in various capacities for about 20 years now. I think that was the number that you used, and that's right. That's crazy, man. That does set the tenor, that does set the mood and the trajectory for Biden's administration. In any event, we have a caller, Charles, calling in from Indiana. 202-521-1320, by the way, is the number if anybody else feels like calling in. Charles, you're on. What's going on?
Hey, good morning. I just feel like, Barack Obama was the perfect instrument to pull that off, because I don't think a white president would have gotten away with expanding AFRICOM and doing all that. They would have been called Adolf Hitler. But somehow it diminishes it because the guy who did it was black, and it was like the perfect person to do it. And I just think that if we fail to rebuke Obama, then we're going to be, gravitating towards getting him back. If you don't admit and acknowledge that he had a bad presidency, then when a person like Biden comes along, he can ride that coattail back into office as if it's good. Because if there was any sense, if anybody had any sense, they would say they would be, even in comparison to Trump, they would say, hell no, they would rebuke Biden. But I think there was a failure to rebuke Obama, which leads to more, because you have to acknowledge your mistakes in order to, not repeat them again. And it's still not seen as a mistake. I know people who will defend every decision he made. Every decision he made, they will have some kind of reason why it was different if Trump did the exact same thing, but it was better when Obama did it. And it's just crazy because the people who are the critics right now are going to become the defenders, and the people who are the defenders are going to become the critics. For example, kids in cages. Right now, the people who've been defending Trump for having kids in cages are going to be like, oh, look at Joe Biden keeping those kids in cages. And the vice versa. The people who've been down Trump's throat are going to be like, well, Joe Biden is keeping them in cages because he's just trying to, immigration and stuff. So it's just crazy, man, that people can't see straight. It's hard for people to have, impartiality or objectivity. Everybody is just so partisan and tribal, man.
I love that response. Charles, thank you for calling, man. I love that because it gets to this difficulty of criticizing Obama, especially among blacks. Now, it's obviously why. I mean, the first black president, and you get people who line up to defend them because it feels like so many of the attacks on him were so unfair. And
I think that's over now, though.
Yeah. I mean, but the problem is with Joe Biden, well, that's still, if you notice, he still gets the black vote. It's like, oh, he's close to Obama. He was rubbing shoulders with Obama. But he shouldn't get that. And I think that's the point that Charles is making, that this wasn't a successful presidency, especially under hope and change guidelines, or whatever that means. But I
could come back. We got two calls. Karen calling in from Maryland. Karen, you're on. You got about a minute. What's going on?
Okay. Hi there. Okay. I'm not sure which segments of your show have the most audience, but let me proceed. I just want to, food for thought, and I'd like everybody, I'm not sure if the two of you have made your decisions about what has happened, but I myself am waiting for the elections timeline to play out. And my understanding is that not all of the states have certified their elections. This is nothing that everybody has to agree with me about, but I'm not interested in the press making this decision for us, and I'm not interested in what looks to me to be the intimidation that the press is trying to do, because we have electors. There are several court cases that have been filed. So I myself am holding off judgment until, and I would like to see accurate election results. So I'm not jumping to conclusions.
Karen, we got to go to another call. Thank you. We have another caller calling in. Appreciate the call. Peter calling in from Staten Island. I think this is a first-time caller. I don't remember you calling in before. Peter, you were on. What's on your mind?
Oh yeah, first-time caller. Sorry about that. Jamarl, one thing. For 4 years, we've been hearing about Russia. Democrats have always been going after Trump, but now lefties or MSNBC lefties are saying that Trump is complaining that he lost the election. I think both sides lost the election. And with Iran, whatever happened with the assassination, both sides wanted this to happen. And when Biden gets into office, I guarantee you we're going to see World War III, and Biden's going to lead it because that's what the powerful want.
Now, I don't know if Biden will lead World War III, but I agree with you that both parties seem like, look, I don't know if Biden will go back to the JCPOA. I mean, people are assuming that. But the avenue that's been opened by Donald Trump basically being belligerent towards Iran, I mean, we don't even know if Iran would accept the U.S. back under the same conditions, considering what Trump did when he was in office. Like, so yeah. I agree with you, man. I think there's a lot of this that's up in the air. World War III might be a little strong, but it's a lot of it's up in the air. So let's do this. Let's take a break. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back in a moment.
I don't have Peter yet.
Fault Lines. We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
You check top.
We couldn't put it better ourselves. Tune in to Political Misfits on Mondays at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for Miss the Press, our weekly takedown of Sunday's toothless news talk shows.
Shooting from the lip.
We're taking no prisoners here. Real opinions for real people. Where we bring you people with controversial views, and instead of trying to catch them out, we actually let them expand on their views. What's going on in British politics, European politics, and indeed in world politics as well. And wherever you are, whether you're a UKIP supporter, a Tory or Labour, everything is in turmoil.
John Gaunt.
Shooting from the lip.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, and we're patiently awaiting the arrival of our guest. I'll just, you know what I'll do? I'll tell you how you guys can listen to us. If you want to catch us on the air, we are on AM, FM in DC. You can catch us on the radio there, 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also on in Kansas City at 102.9 FM, 104.7 FM, and 1140 AM. Also, if you are digging what Jamarl and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, please give up a like and share that content. We are on YouTube. That's our main video option. Just do a quick search for Fault Lines Radio and or Jamarl Thomas. Either of those search queries will bring you to our channel. We are also on audio options, including the Sputnik app, Spreaker, that's a website, Stitcher, another website, Spotify, Apple Music, and iHeartRadio. And last but not least, if you want to check us out on Twitter, just go to twitter.com/faultlinesradio. You will find us there. And, also, you can tweet at us, of course, get in touch with us on Twitter, however you'd like to. We have active YouTube chat rooms. You can also, pretty much during any one of these segments, but particularly during the latter halves of any of our half-hour interviews. So those are usually going to be at 7:45 Eastern, 8:45 Eastern, and 9:30 or 9:45 Eastern. You can call us during any one of those segments. Well, pretty much any segment, really, barring headlines. But any of those longer format interviews during the second segment is a great time to call in. And our phone number is 202-521-1320. Again, 202-521-1320. I actually want to come back to what Karen was saying for a second. We had another caller in, so and again, a first-time caller, so I wanted to make sure that we had enough time to get him in before we went to a break. So I kind of cut her off a little bit early there. She was saying basically she does not trust what the media is saying when it comes to reporting the results of the election. She's not interested in it. She's not sort of taking it into account. And that is, that's fine and that's natural. I pretty much, anybody who says they don't trust the media, it's not that I trust them, but I get where they're coming from. I completely get what they're saying on that. On the other hand, It seems institutionally like Trump does not have the backing to pull this thing through. I don't see him pulling off the counter coup that some people would say he needs to pull off, assuming for just a second that this was rampant voter fraud, that this was a kind of electoral coup, which I'm not, frankly, not assuming that. I just don't see, like you were saying, Jamarl, a couple of weeks ago, I don't see him having the institutional support, the backing to actually get this thing done. The Sidney Powell and Giuliani lawsuits seem to be going nowhere. It doesn't seem like they're accomplishing what they would need to accomplish. And the political establishment as a whole appears lined up and ready to bring Biden in. They seem happy and gratified about that fact. And that just seems to be what's happening. I don't know how else to say it. So you can blame, this is maybe a case of like the media itself partly determining reality. The media going along with this has sort of set us into this new status quo. But that's also how it is. And there's only so much we can do. And if I am crying up here, hectoring the skies, standing amidst a storm, lamenting what's going on, that's not going to actually do anything to change what's factually happening on the ground. And so as far as I can tell, Biden is going to be the president from 2020 to 2024, assuming he lasts that long. And Trump won't. Anyway, Jamarl, what's your take?
This, if I can get there we are. I'm sorry. No, technical difficulties. What's wild about this? Kind of like you said, Shane, I don't think it's a cheap comment at all. I think the comment is dead on. If Donald Trump, as opposed to looking at the economy and saying, I need people to go and work because the economy is taking a hit. And if the economy takes a hit, the one reason that people are going to put me in office, even if they don't like me, is because the economy is keeping going. And the focus on that, missing the point that the economy only runs because human beings can run it. And if those human beings are getting ill or sick, or for that matter, freaked out that they will get ill or sick or die, then your economy is going to come to a halt because of that. That's your issue. That's what you have to deal with. And he was so focused on just the monetary aspect of this, the stock market and those type of things, that honestly, if Donald Trump would have dealt with the mask, if he would have had, the Defense Production Act, producing the stuff that he needed to produce in a short period of time, you would have never needed to do this. It's very possible, yes, people would have died. Maybe if it was 100,000. And to be honest, they would have heaped scorn on Donald Trump regardless, even if it was 100,000, right? Because they would have not seen this reality. But more importantly, the mask or the mail-in ballots, that stuff was done because of COVID. That was done because that was out of control. So it's this kind of weird thing where it's coming back to bite him that he didn't get control of the virus itself. And now it's almost like he's punishing us with a virus that's out of control. But in honest terms, I think you nailed it the first time around, that if he would have dealt with the virus in the honest, real way that he needed to deal with it, so it wouldn't necessarily be uncontrolled, these people wouldn't have needed to do this in regards to the mail-in ballots. Democrats wouldn't have had the excuse. So, I don't think that's a cheap comment at all. This is one of those things where it just kind of
here's
back.
I hear what you're saying, and I made the comment, so I don't want to attack it too heavily because it's me, and you don't want to have sort of autoimmune syndrome of the soul where you're constantly denying yourself and attacking yourself. On the other hand, I do. I'm gonna criticize what I said there. Here's the other side of that, though, is if he had shut down, if he'd done the lockdown, if everything had gone perfectly smoothly and America inexplicably had 0 cases, and again, this is not just an improbability, this is an impossibility, but just assume for a second that happened, he would have been attacked mercilessly for unnecessarily shutting the economy down. I can't help but think that's how it would have gone. He would have hamstrung the economy. Everything would have been shut down.
There's no way out.
In other words, this is a catch-22 situation.
Yeah.
He's gonna get hit regardless. If he shuts things down, the economy goes down the crapper, which very likely it would, because we're so dependent on international trade flows and the exportation of agricultural goods and food and all this different stuff. If he'd done that, our economy would have had serious problems. If he hadn't done that as he did, if he'd done the middle ground, there would have been this other set of problems. I'm not trying to say that everything is equal here, but I'm just saying to push back on that slightly, we're all just screwed. If you assume for a second that this is, it's on the one hand of the sort of moral and practical calculus, you have economic interests, and on the other hand, You have health interests and sort of, human long-term demographic interests where you just don't want your population to shrink over time, as looking at it from the perspective of the state. And then on both hands, that if the more you have of either side of the scales going down, you're going to have follow-on effects on the other side. So the whole thing is just doomed over time as the virus spreads. It's like there's no right way out of it. There's no real resolution of that problem. So whoever's going to be president during this, if Hillary had been president, I don't think she would have got a second term. But she might
you
not
think whoever it was? That's interesting. You think whoever it was, like if this was Obama, do you think Obama would have gotten a second term? Oh, third term, I'm sorry. Like, let's say, the FDR thing didn't screw with Republicans so much that they got rid of the second term stuff. Do you think Obama would have gotten a third term under this?
Fourth, fourth term. Very likely no. I don't think so. And here's the thing. I think it's actually partly a uniquely American problem because we don't like being told what to do, and that affects who's liable to wear masks and what percentage of the population is going to wear masks and all this different stuff. But frankly, no president, as we can see, no past president successfully prepared us to navigate this crisis in terms of stockpiling up the material needs that we had, specifically masks, and during the early stages, it looked like ventilators too. No president prepared us for this. Obama wouldn't have prepared us for it. And then a bunch of people would have started dying during his administration, whatever happened, either that or the economy gets hit really hard. I don't see anybody successfully navigating this kind of crisis. You would have had to have prepared for this years or decades in advance, which frankly we had time to do, and we didn't. So that's a reason to indict the political system. But Jamarl, what's your take? How do you think this would have gone?
Very interesting. I think Obama would have navigated this. Maybe not elegantly. And I agree with everything you said. Like, if Obama would have lost 50,000 people, they would have been screaming to high heaven, "You lost 50,000 Americans. 50,000 died on your watch." They would be making comparisons to the First World War and all. So whatever that number was, right, there's no elegant way to get out of that. Like, that number could be 10,000 and they'll howl, they will be howling. So fair enough. I give you that. But I do think that the public was giving the president, Donald Trump, leeway for several months. They gave him a grace period. Remember, we were talking about it like, are they going to hit him on this? Are they going to hit him on this? And so I think they would have given the same grace period to Obama or anybody. Now the catch becomes, what would they have done in the grace period, and would they have done enough to mitigate the American public? Meaning, yes, we can accept that certain people are going to die. We can accept that a group or a certain amount are going to die. We just don't want that number to get insane. And would that be adequate for the public to say, okay, fair enough, that wasn't too abhorrent? That's a fascinating question. That's a fascinating.
Here's
right.
the other
That's
side.
A political question.
Here's another thing to bring into it for a second. Why did Trump get that grace period? Arguably, he got it because of the stimulus checks and because of the unemployment that went out. Now, if Obama had been in the admin, do you think the Republicans would have let Obama get that stuff through, like stuff of that order of magnitude, or would they have cried out about the budget? And my supposition here is that they didn't during Trump's administration because of course Trump is on their side and there's no political or real motivation there unless you're a diehard, like a hardliner, like Rand Paul, for instance. There are very few people who are going to hit their own team for doing this, and the Democrats are only going to, they didn't really. They wanted more money. Whereas if Obama had been in the presidency, he probably wouldn't have been able to get nearly that much stuff through. And yeah, I think the public would have gone after him. I think they would have hounded him for it. I'm not trying to, blame either side. I think that it would have been. What's your take, though, Jamarl?
No, I just said that's a good point. I agree. That's a really good point. That's a very, very good point. Because, if you had a Republican House, Republican Senate, would they have given it to Obama? And would they have let him get this win from the standpoint of the amount that he was getting? So, yeah, that's a good point. It depends on the Congress makeup. The one last question before we go into the break. What does it mean for the Republican Party if they lose Georgia and Texas? And what do they have to do to get that back? And I think that's going to be one of the fascinating dilemmas that they're going to have to grapple with. Because otherwise, if they lose both, they're never going to be president. And if you're going to lose both to somebody like Joe Biden, it's a lock. Now, there used to be a point where Democrats used to own the House of Representatives, owned it for like 50 years. I think that changed when Bill Clinton got in office and basically doing this kind of triangulation nonsense. You have nowhere else to go stuff. But I think that's a fascinating question. What does it mean for the Republican Party if they lose Georgia and Texas? So
I don't know. I don't know why the heck they. I mean, as far what are you talking about with Texas specifically?
Well, they almost lost Texas. Yeah, they almost lost Texas this year. Believe it or not, it was the Hispanic population that kept Trump over the finish line for Texas. But you got a demographic shift in Texas and in Georgia. And if that remains, meaning if those states become purple, that's horrendous for the Republican Party. And what do they do politically? Because at some point it can't just be rhetoric. You're losing entirety of states that are massive states. So what do you do to get those states back? And do you just blow those states off and try to find another way to win the presidency?
You know what? That's a long conversation, and I've got a kind of weird response. It's my own little political calculus thing here, but we should go into a break so we can get to our guest. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, and we will be back on the other side of this break with Peter Coffin. Be back in just a minute.
Fault Lines.
Stuck in traffic? No problem. Stay informed. Stay tuned to Radio Sputnik on 105.5 FM or 1390 AM in the Washington, D.C. area. Need more? Follow us on Facebook or check us out on SputnikNews.com.
We are talking
24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
You are listening.
We give you the most essential out of the endless information space.
Radio Sputnik, telling the untold. Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and myself, Shane Stranahan, and our guest, Peter Coffin. He is a YouTube comedian and author known for their eponymous channel and for being recognized as one of YouTube's first 50 partners back in 2006. They have gained widespread popularity for their original comedic sketches, parodies, and characters. And in their book, Custom Reality and You, they explore how reality works in a world where profit is the driving force. Peter, thank you for joining us. How are you doing this morning?
I'm good. It's cloudy and snowy, and it might kind of suck later in the day, but I'm all right for now.
Where are you, real quick, where are you based? I don't mean to get too personal here, but you're talking about the weather. From what vantage point are you describing that weather?
Oh, I am from Michigan. I'm from southwest Michigan. I live pretty close to Lake Michigan, and we're supposed to get absolutely annihilated by snow later.
Oh, that sounds brutal. I'm a couple states away from you. We're based in DC, but during the pandemic, I've been occasionally moving from state to state. I'm out in South Dakota right now, and it was snowy for a while. It's back to normal. That's how it is for me. Jamarl, you're over in Maryland, pretty close to our studios, all things considered. What's it like for you?
It's nice here. I mean, don't get me wrong, a little chilly, but all things being equal, it was raining. It was pouring down earlier. I was hoping my signal didn't go down, but all things being equal, it's not bad here, considering it's winter.
Good to hear. Now that we're all on the same page, and thank you. I like breaking the trend sometimes, Peter. Thank you for being with us. Now that we're all on the same page, let's get into some politics. Let's talk about reality. I'm curious, man. I've seen you talking about this for a while. We actually had a guest on, Caleb Maupin, who'd gotten into some beef with BreadTube, sort of left-wing folks on YouTube who are more, I don't want to mischaracterize, because honestly, I'm speaking a little bit out of turn. I don't know them very well, but as far as I can tell, what is called BreadTube refers to a more or less consolidated coalition of lefties, socialist and anarchist types, who in a lot of ways, nevertheless, fall in with elements of the establishment. And I kind of wanted to get to one side of this, but I wanted to hear briefly, because I've heard of you as some sort of a dissident figure, because you're, as far as I can tell, on the left, but you're also critical of quote unquote BreadTube. I'm curious, just briefly, what's your take?
Well, back in so you really have to go back. If you recall on YouTube, there used to be a sort of a skeptic movement, it was basically the same thing as what you described about BreadTube, but it was consolidated more or less sort of debunking creationist talking points. And out of that grew the sort of like conservatives sort of poisoned that, and it eventually sort of turned into, it was called the skeptic movement, but it was really anything but. And then as sort of a reaction that grew out of that, a more left-wing debunking industrial complex, like they would sort of debunk the things that this quote-unquote skeptic movement was saying. And out of that grew what we're calling BreadTube now. Now, a lot of people would deny the existence of a thing called BreadTube. They would say, well, it's really a loose coalition of people, if a coalition at all. But what it more or less is a marketing demographic and a set of content creators that goes along with that marketing demographic. And various incentives appear to sort of toe certain lines and end up not really being that radical while maintaining a sort of aesthetic of radicalism, which is ultimately the thing that people are consuming here, which is I am smart, I am better than the people that BreadTube is pointing at as stupid. I love the looks and visuals, and I love how they say things. I am very idealistic about the end game of a socialist society. And ultimately, it's just a consumer product. It's this way because we talked about last time I was on, the medium is the message, and it applies here just as much. The character of the medium imprints itself on whatever content you put through the medium, unless, of course, even if, of course, you're attempting to subvert that. Even if you manage to subvert it to some extent, like that character is still going to be imprinted on things that you say. It's still something that you depend on for money. It's still driven by metrics and algorithms, and there's no way around that. And ultimately, it does influence what you do. You pick topics based on, what's going to get people to actually watch. You say things that you're not worried about people getting too upset about, et cetera, et cetera. And it doesn't have to necessarily be intentional, but I think if people are not careful, they end up falling in line with the establishment. And then when you criticize them for that, they dig their heels in, get angry, and stuff like, how I get characterized, which is, like you said, sort of an outlier or an outsider. That people get mad at me over these types of characterizations of it because they see themselves as the smart ones who want socialism, and if only everyone just agreed with them, the world would be a better place. And that's not really how a workers' movement would work. That's not how, ultimately there's going to be heterodoxy in almost anything where you actually see progress, but that's neither here nor there. It gets dogmatic because people internalize and identify as the type of thing they're seeing on YouTube.
Peter, what was one of the main arguments to kind of give people an example? Because it's like somebody saying, "How was it? I had a great day." Well, you don't really know what that means because it's hard to dig into what the individual thinks about when they say great. So it's kind of like that with the RedTube stuff. Can you give us an example of a back and forth or a conflict, let's say a point of contention, that very specific that they've had with you or that you've had with them that kind of elucidates the point that much more clearly of what they are and the criticism against them and vice versa?
I would say probably a good one would be voting. If we're talking about the election, I voted for Joe Biden. I will say that right off. People get angry at me and they think that I'm a Trump supporter or something because I was very critical of the Biden campaign and of electoral politics as a vehicle for fundamental change. This got a lot of the sort of BreadTube demographic, the followers of this content, very riled up against me because the content this sort of milieu was creating was there was a lot of, well, Joe Biden was not my first choice, but it's very important we get the fascist out of the White House. And it's like, well, I'm a materialist. I look at this situation from a perspective of a broader sort of condition-based, goal-based look, I don't look at this as like, what is yes, Biden is better than Trump. That's kind of a duh, but he's also still a representative of the imperial establishment and will not he even said, nothing will fundamentally change. He said that specifically. And that I have been very critical of, instead of doing the sort of reluctant, I know that Joe Biden isn't the best, but the most important thing to preserve democracy is defeating the fascists in the White House, champ stuff. And, that put me in opposition to, like, any questioning of that viewpoint was seen as a serious problem. Similarly, there have been this sort of accusations of something called class reductionism that's been thrown around a lot over the last 6 to 8 months. They've talked about the idea that and there is a legitimate way to talk about somebody being reductive about class and making everything about class in a way that disregards bigoted ideologies and how they affect people. However, basically any mention of class would get this sort of class reductionism argument brought up. In reality, class is an aspect of absolutely every type of thing, and bigoted ideology affects people differently based on their class, so on and so forth. It's not a simple thing. It's more of a complicated, nuanced thing. But any type of bringing up of class, which you would think in left-wing circles would not be controversial, is controversial. You are class reductionists for talking about class at all, basically. And the aesthetic of caring about the worker and of wanting socialism, it's present. But when you start talking about these things in bread tube circles, it ends up being sort of a forbidden topic. You're not supposed to do this stuff because, I don't know, is it rocking the boat? Is it creating too much conflict? I don't know. But it does. It is a thing that you're not supposed to do.
That sounds relatively so. In a broad sense, it sounds cliquey, and I don't mean to reduce things to not to class in this case, but to clique. To this sort of
yes, I agree with you.
Yeah, and I don't mean to make things that simple, but there, it's just peer pressure comes into play. If you have a community, and like you're saying, if you become over time a sort of commoditized identity product, if you're pitching a way of looking at things and a way of looking at yourself to your audience as a media entity, you're just going to get that. And so I don't, it's not, I'm not trying to single them out for it, but that's how it sounds. This actually brings us to sort of one of the topics we originally brought you on to talk about, ties into it in an interesting way, which is this, the phrase that goes around cancel culture, the idea of canceling people or being canceled. And this also ties into, I'm just going to try to bring these two things together and pitch it to you to take away. On the one hand, the use of canceling, the use of sort of boycotting identities online. And then on the other hand, this conflict between identity politics and literally directly what you were talking about, and economic class-based ways of seeing things, where we'll often bring on guests who are critical of the left in America and around the world, moving from sort of an economic foundational view of things towards an identity-based one that inevitably divides people against each other. Instead of trying to unify, I'm not exactly a hardcore lefty. I'm not even a lefty per se. But instead of trying to unify people in a proletariat movement, anyway, I'm just curious, Peter, what's your take on that sort of set of issues?
Well, to start off at identity, because I think identity actually plays very much into what people call cancel culture. But to start there, I think one of the big problems is that people are not willing to look at identity as part of the hegemonic ideologies that the overarching structure is sort of imposing oppression based on. Like, for instance, race is certainly, it is a set of real issues, and people who deny that are insane. But what it is, race was created out of race science. The concept of race outside of, different cultures and things, the concept that we use today where people are biologically somehow different, and I don't agree with this personally, but it arose out of a need to justify slavery in the 1800s, just as that conflict was ramping up further and further. It arose out of a need to have a class of people who is further exploitable than simply workers. It arose out of a need for free labor. It is very much based in economics. It's just a development of ideology beyond that. And what we end up doing today on the left, or what they end up doing, I don't know that I would say I identify with this personally, but you end up having people not taking it on as an ideological prospect that is being forced on them from the top up. They are taking it on.
Taking it up. Yeah, you know what? We're out of time. This is too expansive of a conversation. I was a little bit too ambitious. Thank you for joining us. They end up taking it on and using it against their own interests, against themselves. That's a very interesting involution. We've got to have you back on to talk about it. Peter Coffin, YouTube comedian and author. Go check him out on YouTube and Patreon and Twitter. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Be back in a minute with headlines.
Listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault Lines.
Live from across the United States, it is now time for the last hour of the most disruptive show covering news and events across those divided states, as well as across our divided, fractured globe. In the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, the ever vigilant, the last man on the wall, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together, you are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Man, that was a good conversation. I just wish we'd had more time. You know what I'm saying?
He's a brilliant guy. Love. I mean, because even his book, it thrills me. The reality through this kind of monetized lens, and what does it mean when you have monetized reality? Is it reality at all? At the point. No, he's a fascinating guy. We got to have him back.
Absolutely, we do. And it just, I want to give him a tiny bit of props. We got to go into headlines here. If you for those still listening, if you were interested in what we were talking about there, you should go check him out. YouTube, Patreon, and Twitter. Peter Coffin. PeterCoffin. Just want to get that out. Didn't really get a chance to give him that, but he joined us. Want to have him on for longer next time. In any event, in the news this morning, first up in COVID news, the total number of coronavirus cases in the United States for November surpassed 4 million on Saturday. That is more than double the record set in October of 1.9 million cases, with the total number of cases confirmed right now sitting at about 13.5 million. In the U.S., that's out of 62, almost 63 million cases worldwide. At least 818 new coronavirus deaths and 136,000 new cases were reported in the U.S. yesterday. Over the past week, there has been an average of 162,000 cases per day. That is an increase of 8% from the average 2 weeks earlier. In New York City, Mayor Bill de Blasio announced plans to allow elementary school and pre-K students to return to in-person learning on December 7th. That's just about a week away from today. In fact, it is exactly a week away from today. 3 days later, the city intends to welcome special education students back to in-person instruction. In-person schooling will only be available to students who opted into at least some form of in-person learning this year. That number amounts to less than 335,000 children. Under the new plan, the middle and high schools would stay closed. The largest public school district in the country will adjust its testing from monthly to weekly, boost random testing, and require all in-person attendees to have consent forms to permit them to be tested or a medical exemption. The city will also get rid of its 3% test positivity threshold that triggers school closures and instead keep track of the number of classrooms and schools that close after multiple COVID-19 case confirmation. So instead of doing on a sort of broad batch basis, instead of taking 3% test positivity across all schools, they're going to be looking at the number of classrooms in schools that close individually. Just trying to clarify slightly. In other news, Trump has lashed out at both the FBI and the DOJ, accusing them of working against him in his attempts to contest the legitimacy of the presidential election in 2020. In his first interview since November 3rd, Election Day, he has said he would never accept that he was beaten in the election, saying, quote, "There's no way Joe Biden got 80 million votes." We actually have a clip for this one. This is him on Fox News in his first interview since the election. Andre, let's play that clip.
We won the election easily. There's no way Joe Biden got 80 million votes. I just said there's no way Joe Biden beat Barack Obama in the black communities of various cities, and then he did very badly compared to Obama in other cities throughout the United States. There's no way it happened. This election was a fraud. It was a rigged election.
So this is what I wonder. You know, how is this going to affect in the next 4 years of Republican opposition to Biden? Because obviously they're going to be opposed, but how is it going to change it? Is this, you know, you earlier on we were having this conversation back and forth about whether or not this would be a sort of Russiagate of the 2020 to 2024 Democratic term, assuming Biden sticks it all the way through, be the Biden presidency, of course, and not the soon-to-be Harris presidency. And then, you know, we were talking back and forth about that. If I remember correctly, I was saying something like this probably isn't quite salacious enough. In other words, there's going to be another story, and then I think we had Peter Lavelle on. He thought it would be the like Huntergate, the Hunter Biden laptop disclosures, and that would be the thorn in Biden's side, his Achilles heel over the next 4 years. On the other hand, I just want to come back to this though. You have a president who is doubling down his first interview since the election, saying there's no way this could have happened like this. He just does not believe it. Do you think Republicans are going to pick this up? Do you think that sort of rallying cry against the legitimacy of a Biden presidency is going to carry through for the next 4 years, or do you think this is going to die out? Jamarl,
so I think it depends on who you're talking to. If you're talking to Republicans, if they're anything like Sanders supporters, they're going to feel this. Like, think of Sanders supporters for 2016 and 2020. In 2016, it's very clear he was cheated. That's the perspective, right? And whether or not Trump can substantiate that or not may matter less than him being so hard on that particular point and so overt on that very specific point. So there is that point. I do think there's deeper politics being played here. Kamala Harris should not be in a position to be president. Kamala Harris couldn't get the black vote at all, was getting the white liberal vote. She was getting that. The Hillary Clinton crowd, she's got that. But the Hillary Clinton crowd is a very tiny group within the population. And yet, Kamala Harris is sitting in the vice president spot, a heartbeat away from what? A 70-something-year-old man that basically just got out the closet a few days ago and already nearly broke an ankle. So it seems that they wanted her. They got her. And they stuck her in there, knowing that in 4 years, she either get a launching pad if Biden is not necessarily capable of going, or let's be very honest, Biden has a lot of age on him. So Biden might not be able to carry the burden in general. So basically, they've stuck the country, with Kamala Harris, despite the fact Kamala Harris couldn't, get the vote of any particular population. How weird is that? So it's like, yeah, they may go after Biden for this, Russiagate stuff or the, Russiagate 2.0. But at the end of the day, I think the person who wanted to be in, or the ultimate aim of all of this, is getting Kamala Harris in. A new face, new, genitalia, new skin color. But at the end of the day, the same person as Biden, as Hillary Clinton, as Bill Clinton, as Barack Obama. Same person. All of them. So, I mean, it depends on how you look at the politics, right? But I think that the Kamala Harris thing is one of the most significant in-runs around the American public that I think it's more profound than I think we give it credit for yet.
Interesting. I'm just thinking about that. And anyway, back to the headlines. The handover of power from Donald Trump to Joe Biden takes its first step today, with Joe Biden due to receive his first presidential daily briefing. The president-elect has also named more positions for his cabinet, including an all-female communications team. I just want to point out that's a little bit. You can spin this a couple of different ways. You can look at what I'm about to say from a couple of different perspectives. But isn't that sort of sexist? Isn't that sort of like making women the face of the White House and using them for, in a role that women have traditionally been used in throughout history when they've, am I making any sense here, Jamarl?
You're making sense. They're specifically picking women for the role as opposed to picking people who are, well, I'm not going to say it that way. It just seems like finding gender is the focus as opposed to skill. And it's not like you can't have both, but they're just being very over the top at, we put women in this position. And you have a lot of people like, wait, can we just get health care? Can we just get something real? I get the gender thing. I get it. Yes, all things being equal. Yes. But basically, you could make all of them men and give me health care. And I think the public will be far more appreciative. I could be wrong.
Well, but it's also, I guess, and here's the deeper point that I was trying to make, and I risk sounding sexist myself if I try to make this too stridently. But it's like they're putting women in this position that's supposed to be the face of the organization, which has traditionally been the role that women have been put into it, but have sort of occupied in these kinds of things. They're using, I see what you're getting in some sense, superficially, they're using them as the sort of buffer.
Yeah, that makes
between
sense.
The administration and the public.
They're making them the face. So you're basically making the point that they're making it known that they're putting women in a position that women are already in. And, if you're going to have to go after anybody in the administration, you have to basically hit a woman to do it. Is that your point?
Yeah,
I think that's what you're getting at.
Even that's not right. And I really don't know how to phrase it. I'm just going to move on with the headline. That was an awkward one.
Fair enough.
Life rolls on. The European Union is working on plans to reset its relations with the United States after 4 years of disagreements. A draft document calls for increased cooperation on the climate and pandemic. Basically, leaders in the EU are happy that Biden is president instead of Trump, and they want things to get back to normal, whatever normal means in this case. In Cuba, President Miguel Diaz-Canel Bermudez has labeled a group of dissident artists and filmmakers in Havana, known as the San Isidro Movement, an imperialist reality show, quote unquote. This comes a day after an agreement to open dialogue with them. In Iran, a top Iranian security official says that Israel used electronic devices to remotely kill a military nuclear scientist, specifically Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, who had little public profile in Iran, but had been named by Israel as a prime player in what it says is Iran's nuclear weapons quest. He was killed on Friday when he was ambushed on a highway near Tehran, and his car was sprayed with bullets. Iran began Fakhrizadeh's burial in a cemetery in northern Tehran on Monday, as the defense minister promised that the Islamic Republic would retaliate for his killing. Israeli intelligence minister Eli Cohen told radio station 103 FM on Monday that he did not know who was responsible. In Ethiopia, the leader of the Tigray region on Monday called on Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed to quote-unquote stop the madness and withdraw troops from the region, as he asserted that fighting continues on every front. This 2 days after Abiy declared victory. Debretsion Gebremichael said he remains near the Tigray capital, Mekelle, which the Ethiopian army on Saturday said it now controlled. Far from accepting Abiy's declaration of victory, the Tigray leader asserted that, quote, we are sure we'll win, end quote. He also accused the Ethiopian forces of carrying out a quote-unquote genocidal campaign against the Tigray people. The UN had warned of possible war crimes if the Ethiopian army attacked Mekelle. Ethiopia's state-appointed Human Rights Commission has accused a Tigrayan youth group of being behind a massacre this month, in which it says that more than 600 non-Tigrayan civilians in the town of Maikadra were killed. TPLF denied involvement. Back in the U.S., as we were talking about a couple minutes ago, President-elect Joe Biden has hairline fractures in his midfoot and will, quote, likely require a walking boot for several weeks, end quote. It's according to his doctor in a statement on Sunday. This is after Biden slipped while playing with his dog, Major, on Saturday. Earlier Sunday, Biden's office announced he was going to be examined by an orthopedist out of an abundance of caution after he twisted his ankle playing with the dog. And yesterday on Sunday evening, President Donald Trump tweeted, "Get well soon," to Biden. Merriam-Webster on Monday announced pandemic as its word of the year. In its noun form, pandemic is defined by the dictionary as an outbreak of a disease that occurs over a wide geographic area, such as multiple countries or continents, and typically affects a significant proportion of the population. The World Health Organization on March 11th declared the coronavirus outbreak a pandemic. That same day, searches for the word were 115,000% higher than on the same date last year. Coronavirus and other related pandemic words, including quarantine, were among the runners-up for Merriam-Webster's word of 2020. And one quick, I'm just going to throw this in here. It was on Wednesday, after our last show last week, because we took 2 days off, one on Thursday, one on Friday. And we haven't reported this technically, even though, most of the folks who follow the news have already heard this. Trump pardoned Michael Flynn. So again, this is relatively old news at this point, but just in case, you've been hiding under a rock, eating turkey for the last week, Michael Flynn pardoned, and a bunch of folks were wondering whether Trump would soon pardon Snowden, maybe even Assange. That came out over the weekend. That was a topic of some conversation, and to some consternation, with some establishment folks saying that Trump shouldn't pardon Snowden or Assange. I don't know, man. I just briefly, Jamarl, you know what? I'll close out the headlines, and then I want to hear your opinion on this. You guys have been listening to Headlines on Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Jamarl, real quick, I got to go into a break, but what was your thought when you saw that pardon come out?
He should. He should pardon Assange, and he should pardon Snowden. And if I'll go further, what he should have did was offer Assange a pardon in exchange for telling him who was the Russiagate. Basically, where did WikiLeaks get the information from? The reason I say that, and I understand that breaks. You don't think so?
It's exactly what you were saying. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but yeah, it breaks a confidentiality.
Yeah, it does.
Assange. Yeah.
Well, I agree with you, but I guess my point is he should have pardoned Assange, and he should do it now. I mean, what's the negative? People already hate his guts. And if he wants to give, a punch or a black eye or a punch in the nose to the establishment, that would do it. Even if you don't get the who gave X or who gave Y, that would definitely do it. He should do it. There's no reason. So that's my thought. But let's do this. Let's take a break.
Agreed.
You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back with one Tom Luongo. Fault Lines. Back in a moment.
Fault Lines. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We give you the most essential information out there. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Want to know how international issues fit into local ones and how local issues fit into international ones? With the historical context to tie them together? Well, we're bringing it to you all by any means necessary. Tune in weekdays from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to hear me, Jackie Lukman, alongside my co-host, Sean Blackman. By any means necessary, your guide to connecting the social, political, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I am joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in DC. If you guys are in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us the like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can do so with a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. But now, joining us, geopolitical analyst and publisher of Gold, Goats, and Guns. He's going to give us the rundown of what on earth is going on. Tom Luongo. Tom, welcome to the show, man. What's going on?
How are you guys? Good morning, Jamarl. Good morning, Shane. I hope you guys had a great holiday. I know I took some time away from all the craziness to just kind of sit back and go,
unplugged.
No, I can't do this.
So
yeah, I had to. It was crazy. I played more World of Warcraft.
Did you? So it's funny. I was telling Shane yesterday, I was eating turkey, listening to audiobooks, and playing Beyond Earth Civilization. Like I've been binging that game. Like,
Beyond Earth. Yeah, I was like, yeah, no, I mean, I've been playing World of Warcraft since the launch in 2004, on and off, and like it's like what's my go-to thing to like zone out from the world, and so It was fun, but I can't. What's been going on is enough to drive you mad. And I always remember when Ron Paul was running for president, he always reminded everybody, it's like, look, if you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong, right? When it comes to politics or advocacy or whatever it is, if you're not having fun, take a step back, recharge, go do something else, go enjoy your life, because nothing is worth that. I saw a tweet from Whitney Webb the other day about how hard she's been working and how she can't sleep, and I said, none of this is worth your long-term health or anything like that. We do our jobs, we do what we do, but it's always and it's important for the analysis as well. You have to take a step back and recharge, because otherwise you become really myopic and over focus on the wrong things. So it's always good to
let's talk about financial stuff. I mean, the stock market is basically gone through the roof. I mean, it like stratospheric at this point. The economy is still on the rocks, meaning basically, we still have all of these jobs, and we're still getting these hundreds of thousands of people not having their calling for unemployment. Explain this, and how long can this go on like this? I mean, there seems to be a complete decapitation between the stock market and just the real economy.
It is a weird time, Jamarl, and very few analysts understand it. And I would have probably not gotten it had I not, been willing to accept a variety of different perspectives on this. And I think one of the most powerful ones that I've come across, and I bring him up all the time, is that Martin Armstrong noted that, in the great cycle of human behavior and economic analysis and economics in and of itself is just the study of human behavior, right? Praxeology and being a praxeological discipline and all that. That what we're dealing with today is this massive shift away from faith in public institutions and back towards, for lack of a better term, and this is the way Armstrong terms it, back towards the private assets or private, faith in individual things or things that have no public risk. And I think all of the stuff, all the chaos surrounding the election, all the now growing angst over, over lockdowns, the pandemics, this great reset that's out there that's becoming that's becoming mainstream in terms of its the political discourse now, as in my mind the bad guys come out from behind the curtain and say, oh, by the way, here's the plan. And I just think that when you have something like that, people retreat to things that are real, to things that they can understand. And whether you agree with capitalism or you don't agree with it, doesn't matter. We have a share market, and share markets, equity markets, are reflections of or pieces of things that are real. There's property, plant, and equipment. There's widgets are made. These are claims on tangible assets, and it's the same reason why people go towards gold. It's the reason why I think people are pushing into the high quality cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, and obviously we're seeing even land prices, right, in rural and suburban land. Home sales are rising while urban centers are drained, right? Because urban centers are the playthings of local governments. So, people are shifting away from being overgoverned towards a state of being undergoverned, and they're willing to pay a premium for that. And we're looking at the stock market. You go to go look up the case for 10-year trailing PDE, which is a good kind of broad measure of where we are and how expensive the market is. This is the third highest level it's ever been, or second highest level it's ever been, only surpassed by the dot-com bubble of 1999, early 2000, where I think it reached a high of around 48, and we're trading at around 33 times trailing 10-year earnings now on the S&P 500, and that's massive. That's higher than it was pre-2008 crash, right? And this is to give you an idea of where we are. And I don't think, and I mean, then we're adding in all the central bank, largesse and all the money floating around, and so it's a long-winded answer, right? But it touches on a great number of things, and it all kind of distills down into, people are buying the Dow, and they don't know why else they would buy the Dow, because, and that's gonna change at some point in the near future. I think the markets are a little overvalued here. Even with all that said aside, I think there's going to be a correction. But whether that correction will be technically significant or not, to only slow the bear down and correct the bear, the bull down, and to correct the bull as opposed to break it, is a discussion for another day. But right now, no.
That's another conversation. I actually want to come back. It does. Yes, Tom, it does. I want to come back to the conversation you opened up about praxeology and the return to the private, away from the public. Sure. I agree that we're losing trust. People across the board are losing trust in public institutions and have been for good reason in many different countries, but most notably for us, of course, in the U.S. for a long time. That's been going on. On the other hand, here's the thing. Where do we come back? When you say we're coming back to the private, if I turn to corporations for a second, I don't think that people trust Elon Musk aside. Maybe there are a couple of larger public figures. I don't think people trust corporations anymore, even their own private communities, for instance. People seem about as disconnected as they ever have been. And, with social media suppression of information, sort of like if you think about, on the other end of this, the last time that I can think where we would have been on this end of the scale with low trust in public institutions, high trust in private institutions, you had like a burgeoning literary industry and community, post-print printing press during the Industrial Revolution. It depends on exactly when you're talking about, but that's sort of the phase in history that comes to mind in Europe. At this point, I don't think we do. Correct. I think people distrust each other radically. They distrust the private institutions that are mediating their society. So where the heck do people turn? What do we have trust in at this point, Tom?
Well, you touched on the most important part of Armstrong's argument, which is that this is a 310-year cycle. Okay. So that roughly lines up with the beginning of the central banks and the age of central banking. These are not step functions. Human society is not a step function. We don't go from on to off. We don't go from private to public and shift overnight. No, these are sine waves that take. We may be reaching that peak of. We're still just past the point of the peak of trust in public institutions or the power of public institutions. They still have a tremendous amount of power and sway, and we're still dealing with it's funny. It's like the World Economic Forum keeps talking about the Great Reset, right? And they want a step function. We're going to reset the world's economy. When the reality is that it may be closer to the Great Awakening of just what it is we've allowed our overlords, for lack of a better term, it's the only one that can come to mind right now, and what they're planning for us. And this crazy stuff. I mean, did you see the guy in New York who declared his bar an autonomous zone? Right. This is the kind of thing that's starting to happen. These are little things that are indicative of what's happening. The riots in France, right? The protests in France that no one is covering, right? And I know I've told you guys this before, and I know I've told the previous hosts this for a long time. I've been along guillotines and rope makers for a long time now. Right, metaphorically speaking, this is the way I see things going, and and don't get me wrong, this is not an endorsement of any kind of violent overthrow behavior. Obviously not. It's just an observation of where I see people's anger going, and what we're seeing in response from our political leaders, certainly in Europe to this point, and places around the United States, and certainly in Australia and others, is draconian response to meet protest with unbelievable amounts of violence over what frankly are really minor things. And now we've got the German government has the ability to go into your home and check to see if you're violating COVID lockdown rules. Excuse me? This is supposedly like one of the paragons of the free world. And now, the Stasi can come into your, and I use that word, obviously, I use that word because, Angela Merkel was Stasi back in the old East Germany. So, you tell me, man, what's happening, right? You know what I mean?
I hear you. Because I see trust at a pretty much all-time low, pretty much everywhere. I see people trusting each other less. I see people trusting public institutions less. I see people trusting themselves less. Right. I mean, frankly, sure. it comes down to down on
we live in a low
every
information
ground.
age, Shane. Think of it this way: we live in a low information age. There's information everywhere, but it's of a low quality, and it's been
the high signal
promulgated.
Low signal, high noise.
We have a low signal to noise ratio. Absolutely, we have a low signal to noise ratio. We have to spend, dude. I have a business. Okay, my whole business is trying to separate the signal from the noise and give people an understanding of what's happening. That's why Gold Goats and Guns has even been remotely successful to the point where it can sustain me and my family. If there wasn't a market for that, I'd be back, jockeying up to a lab bench somewhere, doing what I used to do for a living. So, ask yourself the question, what you guys do. There's such a desire. It's why podcasting off is one of the new dominant media platforms. Why? Because people want high quality information in a high quality, nuanced format. They're craving it. They're desperate for it. Because we're inundated with information that's bad. I mean, I don't care if we're talking about the news, the markets, the signals coming out of the markets. I mean, everything is a mess. And trying to assign, the reasoning as to why the market goes up today or the market goes down today is a mug's game, because it's insane. And when you've corrupted the quality of the information, and look, an economy is nothing more than the aggregation of people's understanding of the information that they have at that moment in time when they make a decision, right? Because that's what prices are. When I put my economist hat on, so I get that. That's what comes out, right? The prices are just information, and when you have low quality information, you get low quality pricing. And people don't trust anything, and why should they? Everyone's lying to them.
I know what you're saying. You know what? Interesting. We got to go into a break. I'm just going to point this out, just a sort of note here. Funny to hear you. I mean, we're talking about these, sort of high flying topics. It's funny to hear you. You're very calm. You're calmer than you usually are, even though things seem to be even in a greater state of disarray than they usually are. It's just funny, Tom. In any event, we got to go into a break here. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back with Tom Luongo in just a minute.
Fault lines. Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold. Catch all the breaking global political and economic news as it happens. Sputnik brings an all-star lineup with expert opinion from some of the biggest names in the news today. Noam Chomsky.
Turkey, U.S. ally, their main goal is to attack the Kurds, the one ground force opposing ISIS. And there have been a kind of a funnel for support of ISIS, not officially, but in practice.
Peter Sunday, co-founder of the Pirate Bay.
We don't have any sort of democratic control over the internet. And I think that we're very naive when we think that the internet itself is intrinsically good. It's not. It's just a very neutral technology that is being used for good things, but more and more being used for evil things.
Icelandic Foreign Minister Gunnar Bragi Sveinsson.
Increased activities in the Keflavik airbase, and that has to do with more activities from the Russian Northern Fleet in the ocean around Iceland, and also, of course, these usual flights of the bombers.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
We're the ones that destroyed the government of Libya. We're the ones that, in a pipeline dispute, that helped destroy the government of Bashar al-Assad in Syria. We're the ones who invaded Iraq.
Former U.S. Secretary of Defense William Perry.
The hostile relationship between the United States and Russia today is dangerous for both countries, not because either country would actually want to start a military conflict, but because there's always a danger of blundering.
Sputnik talks to the brightest minds in politics and current affairs to find out what's really happening. Tune in. Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, and also joining us, Tom Luongo, geopolitical analyst and publisher of Gold, Goats, and Guns newsletter. Tom, I want you to hear a clip. Let's see if the engineer can have it. That clip with Donald Trump this morning, basically screaming at Maria Bartiromo that he's been cheated. Do we have the clip?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, excellent. Let's play the clip.
We won the election easily. There's no way Joe Biden got 80 million votes. I just said there's no way Joe Biden beat Barack Obama in the black communities of various cities, and then he did very badly compared to Obama in other cities throughout the United States. There's no way it happened. This election was a fraud. It was a rigged election.
Now, Tom, Trump is very perturbed here. He's very upset. And he's basically claiming, look, this election was stolen. Now, there are times where Donald Trump lies, and I've said it on more than one occasion. He lies as easily as he breathes. But typically, those are easy tells. Like, he's not a great liar. He's very clear when he says something that seems to be a lie. It seems like
no, he's not.
He doesn't seem to be lying here. At the very least, he doesn't think he's lying. I mean, he thinks there's something dodgy with this race. Now, look, I think that a lot of the stuff can be placed at the door of the mail-in ballots, especially with the high increased numbers, because it doesn't require a person who's basically sitting in a house that may not have any feeling for Biden to just write their name and say, all right, send us off for Biden. I don't think it requires that much energy. In fact, I think that if it wasn't for the mail-in ballots, it's very likely that Trump would have won. So what do you think about all of this? I mean, he is complaining loudly, but he doesn't seem to have the institutional support to push any level of him trying to push this through. What do you think?
Jamarl, I've been saying since May that the United States has been involved in a color revolution against the sitting government. I've called it the Black Revolution, starting with, from the moment the George Floyd protests turned violent. This coup has been going on for 6 months. This looks no different. From my perspective, this looks no different than what we've seen in Ukraine or Egypt or what was attempted this summer in Belarus or Armenia or Georgia or anywhere else that this has been done. You touched on the right word when you talk, or the right phrase in your comment, which is that he has no institutional support. Guess what? He's never had any institutional support. And color revolutions like the one that's being promoted right now or prosecuted against Trump require two very important things. They require some form of demographic wedge. And we certainly have one here in the United States, and certainly been ginned up to insane levels over the course of the last 6 months, far beyond, I think, what the actual problem is. And then the second thing it needs is oligarchic corporate sponsorship, which it absolutely has. So, when you take those things into consideration, and I think you're right. I agree with you that Trump lies for tactical and strategic purposes. You can usually see what they are. And I don't listen to what he says. I look into what he does. But in that particular call with Maria Bartiromo, it's obvious that what he's doing now is doing what he needs to do to rally the troops. I do believe, because look, the only way the color revolution ever successfully countered, and the only people who've done it have been those who have been advised by Putin, by the way. So, conspiracy theories, take that with as much salt as you want, is for the person who's been accused of, who they want out of power, to rally popular support to his side and to use that to create the pressure necessary to change the situation. Now, in a place like Belarus, it's really easy. All Lukashenko had to do was say, look, I'm willing to step aside and have call a constitutional convention, but we're not going to give in to effectively terrorists, which was the right thing. That's all he had to do. In the United States, with the layers of bureaucracy and the layers of legal issues that exist, right? It's a much more complicated defense. And it's going to wind up in the Supreme Court. That's all I can tell you. I've heard every manner of story about what's actually going on behind the scenes, what information Sidney Powell has and doesn't have, yada. Deprecate all that to near zero. It's going to come down to whether or not and it has been for a month now, whether or not Trump and company can throw enough shade on the validity of individual state elections to get the state legislatures to not certify the elector, or not to refuse to declare electors for those particular states and deny Joe Biden 270 electoral votes. That's the strategy. They've made it very clear what it is. And I don't know whether they'll be successful at it or not. I've been saying this for weeks now. I don't know. It's part of the reason why I took 5 days off effectively to play World of Warcraft. Is like, nothing's going to happen until Monday, or nothing's going to happen until next week anyway. So I might as well just kind of check out, recharge, and all the rest of it. I think a lot of people felt that way. And I've kept up with things to see what's going on. And I have my hopes, because I don't want Joe Biden to be president, because it's not because of Joe Biden. It's because of what Joe Biden represents and everything else that's happening. Okay. And from my perspective. And I talked about that in terms of the Great Reset and all the things that are happening and they're coming down the pike early in 2021 after Brexit is done with and all the rest of it. There's going to be a radical jerk of Western society in early 2021. And it all hinges on whether or not they can remove Donald Trump from power or not. So, of course, there's a lot of people. Let's talk about that for a second. Yeah. So they have the incentive. They have motive, means, and opportunity. So
let's okay. Because here's the thing with that, real quick. It seems to me like it's already a fait accompli. It seems like they've already effectively done what they wanted to do, whether it's the media establishment, the political establishment, or the judicial establishment. That they're all pretty established at this point, and it seems like they've successfully segued Biden into a position of assuming power in a couple of weeks, and Trump out of that position. And Trump himself, tweeting out that for the sake of the American people that he's willing to handle that transition. He effectively signaled where he is on that stuff. I mean, we'll see where it goes. On the Great Reset, you were just talking about this. You just brought this up. This is a phrase I hear going around. It has to do with Klaus Schwab, a space-age technocrat, if I ever saw one. And that doesn't just have to do with his sartorial choices, but the clothing. If you've seen pictures of this guy, there's that one photo of him that floats around with him wearing the robe thing, like looking like some sort of magi villain from the Klingon kung fu outfit. I don't even know. So that's on the one hand. Crazy. With the Great Reset, I want to get into this. We only have a couple of minutes left. On the one hand, I kind of want not whatever Great Reset the World Economic Forum has planned, but some larger political and economic reset. That sounds good. That's not what you're talking about, though. I'm not sure I see where this is going. Klaus Schwab and the WEF in general seem kind of milquetoast. I'll be honest. What's the fear about? Why am I hearing so much about folks?
I think they're
very concerned about this.
I think they're some of the most powerful people in the world. I think what I call the Davos crowd, the people who meet at the World Economic Forum in Davos every year, I think it's an aggregation of some of the most powerful people in the world. And I think they all want this. They all want a Minority Report style dystopian future, and they've made it abundantly clear. I remember, because I keep using Minority Report, the Tom Cruise movie by Steven Spielberg, as an example of what they want. Go look at the way that society was built, and it looks very similar to what we have today, minus all the just minus the science fiction, minus the precognition. But they're already building. They want to use AI in the exact same way. What's interesting about that, and I keep using this point because it was just that when Spielberg built that movie, from a pre-production perspective, he went to the best futurists in the world to build his world for him, to help him do the world building and all the pre-production of what that world would look. And guess who he went to? They're the very same people he hangs out with, i.e. the World Economic Forum, all these people who believe in the Fourth Industrial Revolution and the rest of it. So what a shock that it's all going to look like this, with self-driving cars and the ability to shut you down whenever and all that. It's all right there in front of you, the merging of man and machine, all the rest of it. And I think they're very powerful, but I also think they're incompetent. So I always bet the over on, central planner incompetence because, I'm fundamentally libertarian and do believe that the forces of decentralization always over time and over the course of the great cycles are beating out the forces of centralization. And you can see that if you take that statement and kind of apply it as a long form metaphor for human society over the last 6,000 years, I think we're kind of right on that. And so they've reached this kind of pinnacle of where they believe they've got control over everything, and all they got to do is roll out digital versions of the dollar and the euro and cancel all the debts and give us all UBI and turn us all into perfect consumers like they are in Bali. But I don't think it's going to work. I think that is going to create an unbelievable amount of tension, an unbelievable amount of societal unrest. I think we're beginning to see that. We're seeing the beginnings of that now, and Tom, I don't look forward to the fight between the very powerful and incompetent and the less powerful and competent. It's going to be a very interesting time. Okay.
Tom, I think my concern is that I think I agree with you, but not for the same reasons. I think like private enterprise have, there's this merger between, private enterprise and state.
Oh, there is.
And the moment that somebody wants something, private enterprise will be there to supply it. If that is an Android that watches a person as they go from point A to point B, if that's a car, like you said, that shuts off when there's a criminal report out of it, even if it's the wrong person, whether that's a device that's spying on you in your house and getting this small amount of period of time. Let me ask you this.
Yeah.
If you were...
Jamarl, I agree with you.
If there was a crime committed,
completely,
and your Alexa catches a small bit of it, should that be used to incriminate you if you were committing a crime in your own home? Like that stuff ends up coming into play.
I don't want to get off. I don't want to get off on that. I think the point you just made is very important. It's far more important than whether Alexa can be used in a court of law against you. Let's not even go into that, because of course they'll rewrite the laws to make that happen if they wanted to, which they're already doing. That's not the important part. The important part is that perfect merger between the corporation and the state, which again I have said many times. Y'all on the progressive side of the ledger are exactly right to be worried about this. And
unfortunately, Tom, the Democrats...
This is what scares me to death. Again, like I said, the color revolution doesn't work without Google and Facebook and Twitter and the rest of them wanting it.
Unfortunately, Tom,
Amazon and the rest of it.
Many on the left have appropriated these kind of intelligence officials because they are against Trump. So it's like, I agree with you on this. And
exactly.
It doesn't look good. It looks dystopian. So I agree with you, man. This is Tom Luongo, geopolitical analyst and publisher of Gold, Goats, and Guns newsletter. Tom, where can people find you?
You can find me over at my blog at tomluongo.me. You can follow me on Twitter at TFL1728. I'm also on Parler now, not that I'm very active over there, but Parler at Tom Luongo actually got the thing. And you can, if you like what you heard today, I've got the newsletter is designed to, it's all exclusive content designed to create a portfolio strategy around all of this. And you can sign up for that through Patreon at Patreon/Gold, Goats, and Guns.
Very cool. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment for the wrap.
Fault Lines. What do we want?
News, politics, and culture.
When do we want it?
Wait, we weren't finished. News, politics, and culture without the red and blue spin.
Okay, so now when do you want it?
Daily from noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Time.
Okay, satisfied now?
Never. Tune into Political Misfits on 105.5 FM in Washington, D.C. and on 102.9 and 104.7 FM in Kansas City, Missouri. Daily for our analytical fix. No surrender.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan. And if you'd like, in just a minute here, you can be not just listening, but also speaking with us. That's because our phone lines are open and waiting for your calls. The phone number is 202-521-1320 or 202-521-1320. Jamarl, we're having a conversation in some sense about various kinds of apocalypse just now. And I don't mean to be too hyperbolic here, but as one, we talked about this before. In fact, the original sense of the originally Attic Greek, I believe it is, word apocalypse is as an unveiling, as some sort of taking off of the layers, these illusory layers that cover our society, our world, our reality in some sense. That political apocalypse, a political crisis does that. It shows you what's actually lying underneath. I think that's in some sense, there's something good about that. It's if you're seeing what's happening, I know it might sound like I'm going off nowhere. I'm going kind of crazy here. If you see what's going on underneath the surface of your political system, your economic system, your society, the technologies that sort of bring us together and keep us apart at this point, if you're seeing what's actually going on, then at least what's there is there. If you see what's beneath the illusion, then at least you are dealing with an objective truth. And in some sense, I think, based on particularly the first half of the conversation we were having, that's something we're all sorely missing. We were talking about too much information, not enough knowledge, too much noise, not enough signal. When I think about the idea of apocalypse, and I think in some sense that is what we're dealing with, not in a literal sense, but in a sort of more figurative sense. There's this poem that always comes to mind, which is The Second Coming by W.B. Yeats. There's this line in there that I kind of come back to occasionally, and I wonder about it. I'm not sure if it's right. I'm not sure if I agree with it or disagree with it, but I want to hear your take. That line is technically 2 lines, but it's short. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. Again, the best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity.
I love that line.
I always wonder about that. I love that line too, but I don't know if I agree with it, and I don't even know if I know what it means.
I 1,000%
I think
agree with
that's what's good.
God, 1,000% agree
well,
with
it. What does it mean to you?
So
what does it mean to you, Jamarl?
So let's go back to World War I, for example. What's the guy? Hatzendorf is one of the German generals at the time. So Austrian generals. They made this comment that the guy wanted to basically bomb everything, but didn't have 2 brain cells, right? He was looking for any war that he can get his hands on. He has all the passion in the world, and yet what he has passion for threw this world into a First World War. When you look at people like Trump, why do they say, God, man, the left needs his own Trump? Because it doesn't happen that way. The people who want the position of president are typically ones who are not suited for the position. And the people who are suited for it are the ones that don't seek the power in the first place. And this is Congress, this is political leaders. This kind of goes into this vein of mine of there's some people out there who would work for the best interests of the public. But those people almost biologically, almost conceptually, don't have this kind of drive that's necessary in order to do it. Not to mention the people who tend to be good at that stuff are introspective. And so it's like the introspection in and of itself create these kind of qualms of action. Where do I go? What's right? What should I do in this particular moment? What's the best action in this moment? George Bush, he attacked Iraq. He knew it was right. Flat fact, knew it. Didn't have any qualms. Bam, I'm doing it. It gets to this thing that the people who are introspective and are thinkers who can kind of dwell on that, they dither. They are honest with themselves that they don't know what's right. And the ones,
but don't they?
Go for it.
Here's the other side of it, though. I hear what you're saying, and that's my mind has gone there too. But on the other hand, and there's a weird inversion, and we do have a caller at this point, so I should get to him instead of dilly-dallying. But so say we're dealing with an informational crisis, or you can even view it as a spiritual crisis, where you don't know what's right or what's true on some foundational level. What you want is an answer. What you want is some resolution of that uncertainty. And by definition, you're not going to get that by lacking all conviction. You're going to get that with some kind of intensity. Maybe not a passionate intensity, but maybe a passionate intensity. Maybe you just want an intensity of fact, but to get that, you need an intensity of feeling. But if what you and Yeats are saying is true, you're not going to get that. And so in some sense, what you most need in that moment of crisis, in that dark night of the political soul, what you most need is also what you least desire, and vice versa. Does that make any sense? You see what I'm saying there?
But think of Sanders. Let's take a recent example. Does Sanders have the passion? I think he does, yeah. I think he believes what he believes. You know what I mean? I think he's a true believer. Would he be great in the office? I think he would, especially if he could stick to his guns. But therein lies the rub. How do you get the guy to stick to his guns? How do you get the guy to have that passion to translate into action where they're actively doing something? You can't get him to do it. That's kind of the way I view it. It's not so much that when they say passion, meaning it's the conviction is there, the passion is there. I think it gets to this thing of what's right. And there's all of these qualms that approach the individual when they're thinkers like that, that's not there for people who do. I mean,
for the demagogue. And the concern, of course, about a demagogue is that they're pretty soon going to turn, if they're given power, they're going to turn into a despot. Yeah. They're going to use that power, abuse that power. And that just accelerates the crisis. And I don't know how you get out of that one either.
I guess the issue is, something of both. I mean, you need somebody with enough passion to follow through, meaning like an FDR, who, I welcome my enemy's hatred, that type of stuff, where the guy has the energy, the gumption, the drive, and is on the right page. And that seems to be so far and few between Like FDR was an anomaly in our politics. And even though, Democrats still talk about him today and act like, pretend to be him, he was an anomaly. Like that wasn't normal in American politics. And we still talk about that stuff today. And so, no, I agree with Yates. Yates on this. When I look at politics, it's like the people who you would want to get that position either doesn't have the gumption, doesn't have the drive, doesn't have something that's missing, like Obama. Obama went for the presidency whole hog. He wasn't unclear. He understood what he needed to do. If he needed to call Clinton a liar, he called her a liar. He was very clear in what his intention was, and he had the energy to do it. Look what he did when he got in the office.
Yeah, and Obama. To be frank, Obama at the time and during a couple of years of his presidency, he seemed to be that sort of statesman-like person who lacked the passionate intensity, questioned his convictions, that kind of thing. You have hopes, and then those hopes meet their demise very often. We've got a caller though. We got Malik calling in from DC. We are taking.
He dropped.
Probably enough. Oh man, he dropped. Oh gosh darn it! It's only a couple of minutes ago. Wish we had him on. You get taking calls. 202-521-1320 is the number. 202-521-1320. I wonder what Tom. I was thinking of asking him this. We ran out of time, as we so often do. I wonder what Tom would have thought about the line from the Yeats poem. Because here's the thing.
I don't know. I can't predict Tom on that one.
He's a passionate dude. No, you can't. I can't either. And he's a passionate dude. He definitely does not lack his conviction. But on the other hand, he in a lot of ways he's pretty darn reasonable. And he openly questions himself on some things, and some things he doubles down on some stuff. I don't know. I'm just curious about his opinions on things. He's an interesting guy.
If you were in politics,
in any event,
if you were a political leader, and you have, let's say, all of these different things that you need to get accomplished, and you look at your political space and you say, all right, how do I do it? Now the catch becomes who's your clique? Who are the people who you're affiliated with? How did you get in office? And all of those things to some degree are going to influence your opinions. And even if you wanted to do right, let's say, all right, I want to get health care. Well, then it becomes, okay, well, maybe I can't get it because people are going to be against me, but maybe I can incrementally move to it and my funders won't be upset with me about that. Like, you get put into these weird quagmires that make your own action difficult. And it almost takes an ideologue to make that work. The catch becomes, like you said, it's difficult for those guys. I don't know. I know for myself, I get conflicted. And anything that I say, there's a thing in me of doubt, regardless of what it is, even if I know it to be true. And it's kind of pushing back that doubt sometimes and making arguments because I can see the other side of the argument. The moment that you see the other side of the argument, you're conflicted. Now, imagine if you needed people to go to war. Do you want those people conflicted? Do you want those people asking questions? And the people who can go out there and do that job are the people who don't ask those questions. I think that's the way I take it. That when you don't have that doubt, your action is clear. I'm doing this. Very clear. Mind, body, connected. What happens when you have doubts? Well, I don't know if I should be doing this. What if this is wrong? What if there's something better to do? What if dither? But the dither is honest. The acting with, passion and vigor. That's honest in a way, but in a way it's not, because the objective truth is, there's doubt. I don't know. I think that's the way I've taken it. I've heard that line before, and I've always loved that line. I'm glad you brought that up.
No, it's a good line. It's true. I keep coming back to it because I don't know if I don't know what it means, and I don't know if I agree with it exactly. It makes you think. The other side, you know what? We should just go to her. We've got a caller, Louise, calling in from Virginia. You're on the line. What's on your mind?
Yes. Hello, Shane and Jamarl. Very quickly, it's pronounced Yates. And number 2, the worst do not have passionate conviction. They have passionate greed.
I hear you on that one. I've always gotten confused about that one. I sometimes pronounce it Yates, sometimes it Yeats. On the second one, but he said what he said. That's the thing. He wrote down passionate conviction, and I hear what you're saying. I agree with you, and this is why I'm saying I don't know that I agree with the line.
But isn't greed conviction? anything in life.
Think.
I mean, it's up. Nothing matters ultimately, right? Up until the point where the person defines it. And if that person sets their objective to get as much money as possible, I mean, I've seen people get pretty passionate about their dollars when Boeing plane crash. Oh God, I'm losing money. People are going to lose their shirts. Yeah. I know those people died. Why do people going to lose their shirts?
I'm going to give a. Here's. I hear what you're saying. Here's another interpretation.
Go for it.
Greed maybe, and I'm just playing with Luis's interpretation here. Maybe greed is not just greed for money. Greed is greed for power. Greed is it's not just avarice. It's also ambition. And what makes passionate conviction the wrong kind of conviction is the kind of passion that comes with it, where it is a desire for power, where it is the people who are clamoring the loudest during those moments of crisis often aren't the ones who have a conviction that's muddled by doubt, who have a conviction that is sort of buttressed by the questions that doubt leads you to. It's the people who just want power. It is the demagogues. And I don't mean to simplify it, because it's sort of like a one way to cut that knot. But I don't know. Does that make sense? You got to go out here. But what's your take, Jamarl?
Yeah, it makes sense. It totally makes sense. Yeah, I agree with you. Totally agree with you.
All right. You know what?
It's like 30 seconds.
Interesting
like,
show.
Yes.
No, exactly. Oh man, I was relying on you to fill the time there. Now it's a little bit of an awkward thing. You know what? I'll just fill this time by saying thank you. Thank you, Cameron and Raheem, our producers. Thank you, Andre, our engineer. Jamarl, thank you for being my co-host. And everybody, thank you so much for listening to the show. I hope you all have a wonderful day. We will be back tomorrow. You guys have been listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. See you again in the morning.
Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Another one is in the books. It's funny, it felt very weird starting back after Thanksgiving, but it got better as the show went on. Like, it felt more normal to get back into the flow. But I have a doctor's appointment today. I'm finally getting this thing out of my jugular, so applause on that front. So yeah, this has been like 3 or 4 months, and this thing has been a pain. So you have no idea the level of joy that is in me getting rid of this thing. We had a really great show today, so, I'm not going to hold this. Everybody was awesome. I'm just checking, make sure I haven't missed anybody. Shout out to Sabrina. I think that's the last one that I see. Yes. All right, guys. I'm going to say like, share, and subscribe. Make sure you are subscribed. It seems like I think Google has been dumping subscriptions. But make sure you subscribe, and definitely make sure you hit the like button if you indeed like the show. So, thanks all. And I'll see you guys a little bit later